Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 301 Candidate. In fact, in this world, crows have always been a mysterious thing. At least Viserys has always been wary of these blackbirds, because he knows that there is an existence in the cold land of eternal winter that he doesn't know how to explain. Is he a god? Or a demigod? But one thing is certain, he and Viserys have transcended the constraints of the mortal body. Perhaps both of them are now special existence between gods and mortals, and this person has some connection with crows. Even based on psychology, Viserys still adheres to the habit of his previous life. That is, he thinks that crows represent misfortune. He once used crows as live targets when practicing archery. Perhaps the crows later realized that this guy didn't seem to welcome them, and then flew away. The black cat actually caught a crow by himself, which suddenly made Viserys a little interested. Therefore, today's experiment was conducted. He didn't expect that the black cat's strength would actually increase significantly, and the experiment on the black cat was a great success. Next, a trustworthy person is needed to undertake the next experiment. What Viserys can know now is that the black mist bestows on others will greatly enhance their strength. As for whether there are no side effects, he himself is not sure. After the experiment, Viserys ordered the servants to clean up the mess in the house. The 10 poor roosters had been bitten to death by the black cat. However, these 10 chickens will not be wasted. They can be sent outside the city with other food for the 3 dragons to have a small feast. Afterwards, Viserys returned to his own study with the black cat in his arms. The young king sat in his chair and thought for a moment, then asked the guards to find Bessie. Wooly, go find Lady Bessie Joyce. Wooly was the guard whose face was scratched this morning. He was obedient and smart. He had been staying by Viserys' side as a guard and running errands on weekdays. Bessie was Viserys' former kingsguard and the son of a warrior of the 7 gods. Viserys trusted Bessie very much, and this trust was even greater than that of a Baron. Because Viserys knew very well that, if he and Dawn fell out one day, a Baron would definitely stand on Dawn's side. And Bessie was his personal confidant. To be precise, Bessie was trained by William Derry, the coach of the Red Castle. Among the people who followed Viserys and made great contributions, only William Derry is not in a high position now. There is even no news about him. He has become very low-key and forgotten by people. The middle-aged coach has become a grey-haired and half-blind old man because of his old injuries. Now he stays in Andlesburg all year round to guide the training of the castle soldiers. The recruits don't know the identity of this old man, but few people know that Bessie Joyce, the commander of the 1st Legion who is now trusted by Viserys, is the person who was promoted and recommended to Viserys by William Derry. Then, not too long passed. Bessie Joyce rushed to the outside of Viserys' study. Captain. Captain. The guards outside the door took the initiative to greet Bessie when they saw her. Yes. Bessie also nodded, and then knocked on the door. Your Majesty. After hearing Viserys' voice, he pushed the door open and walked in. Your Majesty. Bessie walked into Viserys' study. The man was wearing a pure white robe and a white cloak, with a long sword on his waist. There are not many knights who are qualified to wear white robes, and Bessie is one of them. Because he is now also serving as the captain of Viserys' kingsguard, although he is just a commander without troops. Because Viserys has not appointed a member of the kingsguard since Bessie left him. There are only ordinary guards around him, but no poetic white knights. The rules for selecting the kingsguard are very complicated, and loyalty must be ensured until death, even if they are old, disabled, or mentally collapsed. Although Bessie no longer has the strength to lift a sword, as long as Viserys does not ask to drive him away, he will still be the captain of Viserys' kingsguard. Sit down. Bessie. Viserys asked casually without raising his head, while sitting behind the desk. How is the military affairs being handled? Bessie and he were old friends, so there was no need for too much courtesy between the monarch and his subjects. The two of them chatted casually on the chairs for a few words, and then Viserys did not continue to beat around the bush and spoke directly. Bessie, I have something to ask you. I wonder if you are willing to try. Viserys did not hide anything, but directly and generously told the story of the black fog. However, he did not describe it in detail, but just used the words he had said when joking with Arion to describe this black fog as a kind of divine power. And Viserys is the source of this divine power, and he can freely give divine power to everyone around him. Of course, this number is also limited, and those who receive divine power from him can greatly improve their strength, and perhaps also recover from their injuries. Viserys spoke directly, and Bessie, who had suffered a great disaster, and had always been calm, could not help but open her mouth slightly under the mask. What? Divine power? Bessie was slightly shocked, and her voice under the mask was a little muffled, and she spoke with disbelief. What His Majesty said was so fantastic that he couldn't believe it. Improve strength? Recover from injuries? However, as a former King's Guard beside Viserys, Bessie was naturally very familiar with Viserys. His Majesty was basically talking to him so seriously, he was not joking. Your Majesty, is the divine power you are talking about given by the 7 gods? After being slightly shocked, Bessie hurriedly asked. As a firm believer in the 7 gods, he still remembered the coronation of the 7 gods that Viserys had boasted about. It was only after contact that he realized that Viserys had not even been to the temple a few times, so how could he talk about his pious faith? It was pure nonsense. Now that Viserys took the initiative to mention divine power, Bessie naturally thought of the 7 gods he believed in at the first time. No, not the 7 gods. Viserys shook his head slightly in front of the somewhat excited Bessie. I don't know which god he is. Viserys did not explain the connection between the Black Mist and Valyria, but it certainly had nothing to do with the 7 gods. Because the 7 gods did not speak Valyrian. After receiving Viserys' negative answer, Bessie was a little worried. But he quickly adjusted his state, then nodded and spoke in a firm tone. I'm willing to give it a try, Your Majesty. Chapter 302 The Effect of Black Mist. Bessie was willing to take risks to trust his king, because his fate was changed by him. If it weren't for Viserys, he might still be just an ordinary hunter in the village, and he would even have to worry about the attacks on the village by the Brotherhood and bandits. Even though Bessie was a brave warrior, before she was injured, 2 fists could not beat 4 hands, and he might die under the knife of bandits one day. This is how Bessie's father died. And Viserys didn't act too hypocritical when he saw Bessie agreed. Then he asked him to stand in front of him and took off the mask on his face. The Andal warrior had suffered severe burns and his face had long been unrecognizable, so he wore a metal mask all year round and wrapped himself tightly. He was afraid that his appearance would scare others. Viserys once mentioned to him that he would find a noble woman for him, but Bessie politely refused. And now, Viserys looked at the hideous and terrifying face in front of him, and his heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Although he had seen Bessie like this before, he couldn't help but feel a little nervous every time he saw her. If there is anything strange, you must tell me in time. The silver-haired young man, who looked completely different from Bessie now, opened his mouth and instructed. I'm going to start. Bessie, who had become the Legion leader, was a little nervous after taking off his mask in front of outsiders. Then he saw His Majesty the King raised a hand, and a ball of black mist gradually condensed in his palm. This is. On that dark and hideous face, Bessie's eyes were still clear, and he widened his eyes slightly, because he really saw a ball of black mist condensing from Viserys' palm. He didn't even know if it was his illusion. He faintly heard a sound like the howling of a ghost. Could this be? Bessie just thought of something in his mind, but before he could think more, Viserys pressed the black mist in his palm to his forehead. Other wisps of black mist flowed along Viserys' palm and drilled into Bessie's forehead. Time flowed slowly. Bessie felt a cold force flowing into his body. He shuddered and then began to feel some changes in his body. This feeling was hard to explain, but he just felt closer to the king, as if he had a spiritual connection. What was going on? Bessie didn't know why, but he didn't feel anything unusual, so he didn't say anything. After Viserys completely injected the black mist into Bessie's body, he slowly withdrew his hand until Bessie's body had a rejection reaction and the black mist bounced back. It's over. How does it feel? Viserys asked. HMM. Bessie thought for a moment, then said, My strength has increased a little, and my body seems to have recovered a little. Bessie and Viserys understood it differently. He felt that the black mist was like a life energy, not a soul, and it helped him repair his broken body. It was not difficult to hear the excitement in the dark-haired man's words. After all, it had been so long since he was burned. He had given up and thought that he would never be able to pick up a sword again in his lifetime, but he didn't expect Viserys to give him another chance. Bessie clenched her fist slightly, and there was still some pain between her fingers, but it was much better than before. Then she drew her sword from her waist. Clang, the sword light illuminated the entire study. The guards outside the door seemed to hear the sound of swords being drawn in the study, and immediately asked, "Your Majesty, what happened?" However, Viserys seemed very calm, and took 2 steps back, to make room for Bessie. Hearing the words of the guards outside, he spoke calmly. "It's okay. This long lost feeling of holding a sword is really good." Because of the severe burns, Bessie had injured the joints of his fingers, so it became a little difficult for him to hold the sword. The Maester diagnosed him at that time that he would not be able to pick up a sword again in his lifetime. Of course, this was about fighting with a sword. Now Bessie's 5 fingers tightly grasped the hilt of the sword. Although his skin was still horribly burnt, there was a surge of vitality in the flesh and blood under this terrible skin. "Although I haven't fully recovered, this feeling is really good." Bessie swung the long sword vigorously, trying to feel the changes in his body, and said happily. Then he suddenly realized that he was too excited just now and actually swung the sword in front of His Majesty the King. Then he quickly sheathed the sword with a snap and subconsciously knelt on one knee to apologize. "Sorry, Your Majesty." For someone like him who had been seriously injured, such a violent movement was still a little unbearable. The tearing pain came, and Bessie, who was kneeling on one knee, twitched slightly. However, Viserys just blinked his eyes. He was observing the changes in Bessie, and then reached out to help his king's good up. "It's okay as long as the body recovers a little. Maybe the situation will get better after a while." Viserys thought for a while, and then spoke. The black cat didn't change at first, but later this change became more and more obvious. "You are the first person to receive this divine power." Viserys was saying something. At this moment, his eyebrows slightly raised, and he stopped talking. Because he seemed to suddenly notice Bessie's emotions. He seemed to be very grateful to him. Although he did not seem particularly excited on the surface, Bessie was actually so excited that she had forgotten her injuries just now. "What's going on?" At this moment, Viserys suddenly thought of the time when he ordered the black cat to kill those chickens not long ago, and he seemed to have vaguely felt the puzzled emotions conveyed by the black cat. "Is this the same as Balerion? There is a connection between us?" Viserys suddenly realized at this time that there was such a vague connection between Balerion and him. When Balerion was just a dragon egg, it seemed to have absorbed a lot of black fog. When Balerion was hatched, its growth rate was much faster than its brothers, and a person and a dragon could directly connect with each other without words, but with their hearts. So this is the function of the black mist? Viserys' eyes brightened slightly. He finally understood the function of the black mist. He was the source of the black mist, and the people who received the black mist were equivalent to his servants, who could strengthen their own abilities. At the same time, they would also have a spiritual connection with their masters. It was just like the connection between vampires and their transformed servants that he had heard about in his previous life. Chapter 303 Farewell. Melisandre, who has not appeared in Viserys' vision for a long time, has been very busy recently. This woman came from the distant Ashay. She came to the free trade city from afar for her own purpose. The series of things she is busy with recently are naturally related to the collapse of the Great Wall in Westeros, the traces of the White Walkers, and the human coalition. In short, she believes that the person who will eventually defeat the White Walkers must be Viserys. Therefore, she stood firmly on the side of the true king. However, Melisandre understands Viserys' temper. Although she really wants to instigate Viserys to send troops to unite the human coalition to fight against the White Walkers, but she will not do so. After all, she is not Viserys' great uncle, and Maester Aemon is an elder that Viserys needs to respect. What he can say, Melisandre cannot say, although both of them stand from the perspective of justice and ignore personal honor and disgrace. This justice is for the true justice of all mankind. However, Viserys is a very realistic person. Forget hatred. Why? He didn't want Westeros to become a den of evil, but it was absolutely impossible to send troops to help Robert. Robert Baratheon had sent assassins to attack Viserys countless times. His mother Rhaella died because of this, and Viserys would certainly not forget it easily. Unless Robert took off the crown, knelt down and begged for surrender, and peacefully transferred power. But Viserys knew that this was also impossible for Robert with such a hot temper. Ding ding dong dong. In the garden below the palace, the sound of metal colliding was endless. Viserys and Melisandre were walking and talking in the long corridor, and two boys wearing leather armor were practicing swordsmanship below. One of them had long silver hair, violet eyes, and a handsome face. The other boy had black hair and blue eyes, and was a little taller. The boy with long silver hair attacked sharply, and it was obvious that he had received strict training, and every move was well organized. The other black-haired boy was constantly defending passively, and his swordsmanship was more practical, with big openings and closings. He should use a hammer, just like his father. Viserys commented with sharp eyes. If there is still a title like the best swordsman in the Seven Kingdoms, Viserys deserves it. He has completely transcended humanity and become a special existence between gods and mortals. Since Gendry witnessed his master pushing a living person into the furnace for blood sacrifice in order to forge a sword, he gave up being a blacksmith and became an ordinary guard in the castle. No one knows his true identity, not even himself. This time he traveled from Andalus to Pentus, and he was just selected and came here with the main force. Because Gendry was the youngest among the guards, Egon found him, and the two boys of the same age naturally became friends. This child has the blood of the king. Viserys and Melisandre stood on the edge of the corridor and watched the battle below, and then the red-haired woman spoke. Viserys saw every move clearly, and Melisandre's eyes were equally sharp, but what she saw was different from what Viserys saw. Oh. The silver-haired young man raised his eyebrows slightly when he heard the Red Witch's words. Are you talking about Egon? He thought Melisandre was talking about Egon's identity. Could it be that this Egon was really the son of his elder brother Rhaegar? Dragon dreams often carry important revelations. Viserys had dreamed of Balerian's birth, but he had not dreamed of Egon's existence. No. Melisandre was stunned for a moment, then shook her head slightly. I'm talking about the black-haired boy, your majesty. Gendry? Viserys suddenly realized. Gendry had followed his master top to Andorus for a long time, so Viserys didn't react just now. Now that he thought about it, he was really the blood of the king. Viserys didn't know how to identify the blood of the king mentioned by the witches. In his impression, the king's illegitimate son, Mance Rayder's son, and even the son of the Horse King, were all considered blood of the king. If a village chief proclaimed himself the king, would his son be considered the blood of the king? If so, wouldn't the blood of the king be mass-produced? A strange thought suddenly flashed through Viserys' mind. Melisandre naturally didn't know what strange thoughts the serious-looking king had in his mind. She was going to say goodbye to Viserys today. She was about to leave Essos and rush to Westeros to explore the way for the true king, because she realized that the power of the cold god had crossed the Great Wall and was invading the whole world. The magic barrier that blocked the cold had collapsed. If the power of the cold god completely crossed the Great Wall, the cold wind would blow all over Westeros. The whole world, including Dawn, and even the continent of Essos would fall into the dark night and the freezing cold wind. Humans would perish, and all things would wither. This is an era when the magic tide returns. Melisandre warned in a serious tone. Although Arianne often had some vigilance against this woman, Melisandre was not a woman who relied on selling her body. When her expression became serious, it would be intimidating. Before the dawn of the age, the children of the forest had already begun to be active in the land of Westeros. Magic had appeared earlier, and the ancestors began to fight against the children of the forest. The tide of magic reached its climax during the heroic age, when the world was shrouded in a long night, and many heroes awakened among humans all over the world. According to legend, some of them killed evil gods, some defeated terrible enemies, and saved the world, and some used magic to build the magnificent Wall of Despair. Melisandre believes that this is likely to be another era when the tide of magic reaches its climax. Because in the last such era, traces of the White Walkers began to appear, and this time is no exception. The power of magic is emerging more and more. Dragons, White Walkers, the horn of the crumbling wall, the heart of the star falling from the sky, and the thick fog covering the ruins of Illyria is said to have become thicker, and even rolled outward and expanded, actively swallowing some passing ships. All the legends have been confirmed to be true, and there may be more mysterious powers in the future. Before leaving, Melisandre warned Viserys to be careful of witches like her. The power of magic is gradually increasing. Maybe someone will use witchcraft against him. After all, Viserys has offended too many people. Viserys nodded slightly. He listened to Melisandre's warning. And a few days later, woo, a melodious horn sounded from the direction of the port of Pentus. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304, The Unsullied arrives. A desolate horn sounded from the port of Pentus. Dang. At the same time, a melodious bell rang. Crash. A large warship hoisted a three-headed dragon flag, splitting the waves that were rushing and hitting the pier, and docked in the port of Pentus in order, rumbling with a dull and huge sound. On the deck of the warship, a warrior in a bright helmet and armor stood here holding a spear and a round shield. Their expressions were serious and meticulous, like a ruthless killing machine. Soon, crash, the iron chain made a sound, and the warship was anchored in place. The people in the port and the people on the ship were communicating loudly, and then the gangway on the ship was lowered. A fat man in a khaki robe, and with gorgeous jewelry rings on his hands, walked down from the warship. He was the finance minister of the new dynasty, Illyrio, who had traveled thousands of miles to Astapa to buy the Unsullied, returned. He led Viserys to plunder the vast wealth of the governor's family of Pentus, and went to the Slavers' Bay, bringing back 5,000 elite Unsullied warriors for him. He spent almost a year on this trip, and had no news in the middle. Viserys even thought that Illyrio had lost contact. However, he finally returned today. As an elite force, the number of 5,000 Unsullied is already extremely large, and the combat effectiveness is even more amazing. Illyrio has good eloquence. He bargained with Viserys' wealth, and finally bought out almost all the Unsullied in Astapa. You should know that there are only 8,000 qualified Unsullied in Astapa, and the rest are still semi-finished products that have not been trained. Astapa attaches great importance to the quality of goods, and they will never sell the Unsullied who have not been trained as finished products. That will only affect the reputation of the Unsullied and the goodwill of Astapa. The Unsullied legion of 5,000 warriors stayed in the port, and Illyrio, who had just completed his mission and returned to Pentus, boarded the carriage and came to the palace on the top of the 9 towers. Lord Moppetus. The servants along the way saluted him, but Illyrio ignored them and hurried to meet Viserys to ask about the arrangements for the next 5,000 Unsullied. Is this the harpy? Viserys played with a baton handed to him by Illyrio. It is said that the Unsullied will unconditionally execute the orders of the person holding this baton, even if it is to attack their former master. Yes, your majesty. The fat Illyrio stood in front of Viserys' desk and spoke respectfully. This long journey had no other effects, except that his skin became a little darker due to long-term exposure to the sun. He didn't even lose weight because of this. It seems that, no matter where he went, Illyrio never forgot to enjoy himself. Bricks and Blood built Astapa, and Bricks and Blood built her people. Astapa was once a colony of the ancient kingdom of Gis. The symbol of the kingdom of Gis is this monster with a woman's body and bat wings as arms. Then the ancient kingdom of Gis was destroyed by the Valyrian freehold about 5,000 years ago. Now Astapa, Junfei and Meereen are all cities built by the survivors of the ancient Gis empire. Illyrio explained that Slavers' Bay was built on the ruins of the kingdom of Gis, and has now become the central hub of the world's slave trade. How do you plan to arrange these Unsullied warriors? Illyrio asked. It would be a bit too extravagant to use the Unsullied to maintain the city defense. These elite warriors should not be used only for these simple tasks. However, there is no war in the kingdom now, and the Unsullied have no other good place to go, except staying in the city. Moreover, the Unsullied will not rob or rape, which is the best choice for maintaining the city defense. Leave them in Pentus for now. Viserys pondered for a moment and then spoke. If there is a war, they will be transferred to join the war. Now Pentus should rest and recuperate. The previous wars were too frequent. Viserys still needs to let the soldiers calm down and get enough rest. Quietly waiting for the battle between the coalition of the Seven Kingdoms led by Robert and the White Walkers. In the afternoon, Viserys rode a white horse and inspected the troops of the Unsullied in the most magnificent square in Pentus. The Unsullied warriors stood upright with their chests held with spears and round shields, standing motionless in the cold wind under the sun. This is the king of the Andals, the Roiner and the First Men, the legitimate ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and the protector of the whole realm, the Lord of Andorus, the protector of Pentus, and the Seven Gods crowned true dragon Viserys Targaryen III. The guard standing beside Viserys chanted loudly, and there was silence around, and the voice spread far away. Whoosh, a gust of cold wind blew by. The 5,000 Unsullied warriors below did not make a sound. Their faces under the spiked helmets were firm, and their eyes were dead. Viserys' long title and brilliant light could not change their color. From now on, he is your king. The guards swallowed again when they saw this scene, and then continued to shout loudly, trying to make all the Unsullied hear. However, the eyes of these Unsullied were fixed on the harpy baton hanging from the waist of the young man with long silver gold hair. They did not submit to Viserys because he was a king, a guardian, or a dragon lord. It was because of the harpy baton hanging from his waist, which was equivalent to the tiger talisman, that commanded the Unsullied. The most important point in the training that the Unsullied received, even more important than their fighting skills, was obedience. Viserys rode on a snow-white warhorse with the harpy baton hanging from his waist. Quietly examining the Unsullied army lined up in front of him, a strong pressure came over him. This is a visual and psychological oppression brought about by the uniformity of 5,000 people. It's terrible. Everything about the Unsullied is for obedience. Viserys said silently in his heart, including cutting off their male characteristics, so that they can focus on fighting, and have no other desires, erasing their personality, emotions, self and even humanity. After getting the spiked helmets of the Unsullied, they must wear masks to the slave market, buy a newborn, and kill the baby in front of his mother, and then compensate the newborn slave owner for his losses. The guards around Viserys finished all the words, and the Unsullied below remained motionless, without any response. Viserys' guards looked a little embarrassed, and turned to look at his king. Your Majesty, this. Chapter 305 Grey Worm. It's okay. But Viserys shook his head. Then he held the reins with one hand, then squeezed his legs against the horse's belly, and urged the horse forward. The hooves and the bright silver armor on his body made a sound. Viserys rode his horse alone to the front of the Unsullied formation. The biting cold wind blew his silver gold hair and cloak. The young man squinted his eyes slightly at the neatly arranged Unsullied soldiers in front of him, and at the same time, called the black dragon Balerion in his heart. Ho! In an instant, a huge dragon roar came from behind the Unsullied army, resounding throughout the sky. A huge dragon with a body that covered the sky flew from afar, and the faces of the Unsullied warriors who had just had a firm face and meticulousness changed instantly. This is, although the Unsullied have undergone cruel training, they can remain calm in the face of any dangerous situation. However, this is still the first time they have seen a dragon, and the size of this dragon is so huge. The huge shadow of the black dragon loomed over the ground, its wings spread out, and stirred up a huge wind, its ferocious and huge dragon head slightly raised, and let out a dull roar, its scarlet eyes locked on the densely packed little people below. The Unsullied corps below also instantly had a small commotion, but no one fled in the face of battle, and the commotion only lasted for a few seconds. The next moment, the officers with 2 or 3 spikes on their heads in the Unsullied corps began to roar loudly at the same time, and the senior Unsullied officer with 3 long spikes on his head, with a stern face and a resolute expression, stood in place without moving. His brows were tightly knitted into a knot, and he looked up at the giant dragon above his head without fear. He was different from other senior Unsullied officers with 3 spikes on their heads. The spike in the middle of his head was like a young feather that was pointing upwards, and it was long and straight into the sky. Then the Unsullied officer standing in the center with a long spike on his head suddenly spoke loudly. Everyone, form a formation. Protect the master. His order was like a ray of light in the darkness. At least it let the other unsullied soldiers and officers know what to do now when facing this monster they had never seen before. Form a formation. Form a formation. Quick, quick, quick. All the unsullied officers wearing 2 spike and 3 spike helmets began to shout loudly according to his orders, commanding their soldiers to form a formation and prepare to welcome this enemy that fell from the sky. Crash. The unsullied who had been motionless just now were like a dull and resolute big stone, but now they turned into a turbulent and flowing tide in an instant, surrounding Viserys on his horse. Quick, quick. All the unsullied soldiers were running, and they were able to quickly find their positions in the formation. They were well trained and there was no confusion or timidity in such a situation. And outside the formation, the tattered prince, Illyrio, the Minister of Finance, John Connington, Bessie Joyce, the commander of the 1st Legion, Mise Toyne, the commander of the 4th Legion, and many other people from Pentus were all watching the ceremony from the outside. Your Majesty. Viserys' guards were a little anxious when they saw that His Majesty was surrounded by the unsullied. They held the hilt of their swords with one hand, stood up and wanted to rush over to rescue Viserys. Bessie, who was wearing an iron mask, raised her hand slightly while sitting on horseback to stop him. Your Majesty is fine. He knew that this was Viserys' intention, to test the strength of the unsullied. At the same time, it was also to show off his muscles to these unsullied soldiers who had just come to Pentus from thousands of miles away. Tell them what kind of person the master they will follow in the future is, and what kind of strength he has. Now Bessie, who is wearing a white cloak, has bright eyes under the mask. The strength of the unsullied amazed him. He had seen the guards of the unsullied in Pentus. Because of the high price, most of the unsullied have become guards of some kings, good lords, and archons, and few have formed such a powerful army. In fact, the greatest power of the unsullied is on the battlefield. Fighting alone is not their strong point. The more unsullied warriors there are, the stronger the formation will be, and the strength of the unsullied can be fully exerted. And in the center of the formation, Viserys felt more strongly than the people watching the ceremony outside. The 4 words obey orders and prohibit perfectly explained his impression of the unsullied legion. He has been surrounded by the soldiers of the legion in the center. Raise your shield. Then, it was the unsullied officer wearing a 3 spike helmet who spoke loudly. Raise your shield. Raise your shield. The next second, the orders were quickly conveyed, and all the unsullied raised their shields like waves. At the same time, they all issued a low and powerful command. Hoo. Boom. Countless shields formed an indestructible shield formation in an instant. Put up the spears. Crash. All the spears were put up in the gaps of the shield formation, and the indestructible shield formation just now instantly turned into a hedgehog covered with thorns. This person and Viserys also looked at the person who was hiding in the unsullied formation, who looked inconspicuous. The orders of the unsullied had always come from his mouth, but he had no decorations like other unsullied, and looked not much different. Just a set of sewn tunic, a short sword, 3 spears, a shield and a spiked helmet were all he had. But he had the most spikes on his head, and the spikes were the longest. This was the difference between him and other unsullied. It seemed that he should be the leader of this group of unsullied. Viserys noticed the other person at a glance when he just opened his mouth. Is he Grey Worm? Viserys stared at the other person closely and couldn't help thinking in his heart that there was such a possibility that it might not be him. And the other person only left him a side profile. Boom. Then Balerion fell heavily from the sky, stirring up the dust. It landed right in front of the unsullied army, raised its neck and let out a deafening roar. Roar. A strong wind with a strong fishy smell blew in their faces. But all the unsullied soldiers did not retreat a step when facing the dragon at close range, but their hands holding the spears tightened slightly. Okay. At this time, Viserys finally spoke, waving his hand to interrupt Balerion's continued roar. The black dragon was interrupted by Viserys in the middle of its majestic roar, and it choked for a moment, and then white mist came out of its thick nostrils, looking a little dissatisfied. Viserys' eyes fell on the unsullied warrior who had been giving orders just now, and then he spoke. Come here. What's your name? Chapter 306 Black Bug. However, what disappointed Viserys was that this unsullied officer was not called Grey Worm. Your Majesty, my name is Black Worm. the unsullied officer who was called out by Viserys and wore a helmet with 3 long spikes on his head was slightly stunned. Then he knelt on one knee without hesitation and spoke. "Black Worm?" Viserys was slightly disappointed. Then he raised his head and asked the unsullied army in front of him, "Who is called Grey Worm?" Wow. As soon as Viserys' voice fell, dozens of unsullied soldiers in the neatly arranged formation stepped out without hesitation. "Your Majesty, we are called Grey Worm." These dozens of unsullied soldiers who walked out of the formation spoke in unison. Unsullied soldiers do not have their own names. They randomly draw name tags from a bucket every day to decide their names for the day. Each name tag has 2 words written on it, one for color and the other for worms, so the phenomenon of duplicate names is very serious. And Viserys sat on the back of the horse and watched these grey worms walking out of the formation. Most of them had 1 spike on their heads, and only one had 2 spikes. It was obvious that he was not the grey worm who was later unanimously elected as the leader by all the unsullied. Forget it. Then the silver-haired young man sighed. Then he waved his hand and ordered the abolition of the rule that the unsullied change their names every day, allowing them to restore their original names before being castrated. And the black worm who could command all the unsullied was undoubtedly the leader of the unsullied army. He was proficient in the tactics of the unsullied and knew how to exert greater power. However, Black Worm thought about it for a while, and he did not restore his name before being castrated. Perhaps it was too long ago, and he could no longer remember it. He decided to name himself with the name he had today. He was called Black Worm. "Your Majesty." Black Worm knelt on one knee again to express his gratitude to Viserys, because he restored the original names of all the unsullied. And Viserys did not say much, but just smiled and patted Black Worm's shoulder, and then climbed on the horse again. The people of Pentos who were watching outside cheered. In their opinion, the strength of the Targaryen family has been growing day by day. With the addition of another army of the Unsullied, Pentos has become more stable and powerful, and the future is promising. Those who want to make trouble in Pentos are even more worried. The strength of Pentos has also come into their eyes. It is becoming more and more difficult to make something happen here. If you are not careful, you may even lose your head. In the morning, the Unsullied troops were inspected, and in the afternoon, Viserys was still thinking about the Black Mist. Viserys injected the Black Mist into Bess's body a few days ago, and has been observing the changes in the Black Mist. Experience has proved that Viserys' guess is not wrong. Bessie can indeed absorb more Black Mist for Viserys by killing people. Bessie executed many death row prisoners in the prison, and his body has recovered quickly with the help of the Black Mist. Now he can fight normally, but his appearance is still a little bad, and he has not taken off the metal mask on his face. This is exciting good news. Viserys can use the Black Mist to restore Bess's body, which means that he can also use it to do many things, such as improving the strength of some soldiers and saving the lives of dying people. At the same time, facing the increasing demand for Black Mist, Viserys needs someone to help him to further add points, otherwise Viserys alone will not be able to collect too much, even if he is exhausted. He was still worried about this problem before, but now this problem has been solved. However, Viserys still has his own vigilance against the Black Mist. Although he also hopes that his strength can be steadily improved, he cherishes his life more. After all, no one can tell what this thing is at the moment. What if one day it devours the master? Can he resist it? The most important thing is that Viserys' current strength is enough. With the ability to turn into Black Mist, almost no one in the world can kill him. So he has more extraordinary power between God and man, and there is actually no other use. Of course, Viserys also took Melisandre's warning to him not long ago to heart. He knows that this world is not just him who has mastered this kind of magic or extraordinary power. There are many people who have such abilities. They are not kings or governors, and they are probably just insignificant people around them. The curse he mastered may be just a juggling trick before the return of the magic tide, but after the return of the magic tide, it is a terrible means to kill the king and governor. Viserys himself is also on guard, in case one day a shadow with Robert's appearance suddenly walks into his room and stabs him to death. However, now with Viserys' own means, he can actually lurk in the Red Castle alone, turn into a wisp of black mist to drill in, kill Robert and then drill out. He can become an assassin more terrifying than the faceless man, or even the strongest in the world, but he disdains to use such means. Oh, he forgot that Robert has not returned to the Red Castle for a year now. But Viserys also heard about the episode in King's Landing some time ago. The King's Hand Jon Arryn, who stayed in King's Landing, led the Gold Cloaks to surround the Red Castle and ordered the Grand Maester to check the Queen's body to confirm that she was not pregnant. Although nothing was found out in the end, Viserys still shook his head with regret, feeling unfair for the King Tommen, who had never been born. It was obviously his mother's negligence, but it caused the poor child not to be born. Compared with the troubled Westeros, the days in Pentos were relatively ordinary. Viserys had the ability to attack the Seven Kingdoms a long time ago, but he had not yet raised his troops to attack. The first reason was that Viserys wanted to be foolproof and would only attack after preparing more warships. The second reason was that Robert was fighting the White Walkers now. Although he was unwilling to help, he was also unwilling to take advantage of the situation, as that would probably bring him the infamy of all mankind. After all, this was a contest between the living and the dead. Honor is something that cannot be seen nor touched, but sometimes it is very useful. However, Viserys' peaceful days did not last too long. Two rumors came suddenly, which made him a little unexpected. Chapter 307 Two Rumors. The first rumor came from the Great Grass Sea. The iron hooves of the coalition of 80,000 Dothraki flattened both sides of the Rhoyne River. They attacked Pentos in a mighty manner, and then withdrew in disgrace. Among them, Khal Moro and Khal Zico died in the battle, and their Khals knelt and surrendered to the dragon-riding Khal. The other three Khals led the remaining 40,000 Dothraki roaring warriors to fight in Mia, and finally returned to the holy city of Vise Dothraki with a large amount of Mia's wealth. This should have been the end of a story, but at this time, a reversal that no one expected suddenly appeared. That night, the three Khals who had sworn to the Holy Mother Mountain and the stars in the sky seemed to have a conflict over the division of spoils, and then fought in the holy city, where bloodshed was prohibited. Although the carrying of weapons was expressly prohibited in the holy city, these Dothraki were not very law-abiding people. In this huge city, there are many corpses that died every day. Some were beaten to death by fists, and some were stabbed to death by knives. Without mentioning the oldest Khal Moza, the other two young Khals, Khal Pono and Khal Jacko, were once generals of Khal Drogo. After Khal Drogo was burned to death, they divided his wealth and Khals and became Khals. Khal Drogo's Khals were indeed full of talents, and even if they are scattered now, they are still full of stars. Khal Jacko and Khal Pono had conflicts when they were in the same Khal. Now that the attack on Pentos failed, there is a suspected conflict over the division of Mia's heritage. The two groups had their own ulterior motives. In the conflict, someone provoked first, and then the conflict escalated. The enraged people took out the short knives they had prepared long ago, and started fighting in the grass-woven hall as big as a castle. Poor Khal Moza and his equally old blood guards were unlucky. They were caught up in the crowd for no reason, and stabbed to death on the throne. His blood ridders wanted to avenge their Khals, but they were also stabbed in the heart from behind by someone from some unknown side, and fell in a pool of blood. Kill. The more than 40,000 Dothraki warriors outside learned that their Khals were involved in the fight. There were even rumors that their Khals were dead, and they immediately started to make a fuss. Then Vise Dothraki was completely plunged into a riot, with shouts of killing everywhere. Once all the Dothraki people untied the thin veil of holiness of the holy city, there would be endless madness. They had tasted the sweetness of massacring the city in Mia. Once people started and released the demons in their hearts, it would be difficult to stop. The Doshkalin among the Dothraki who were in charge of managing the holy city were the Khaleesi, the wives of the Khals. They heard the news, so they came out and shouted loudly to stop the riot of their own people, but they were stabbed to death by the Dothraki who had already killed their own people. Some even suffered a more miserable fate. Although many of these widowed Khaleesi were already very old, there were still many young and beautiful Khaleesi among them. Vise Dothrak fell into a riot. The tribes of the three Khals began to fight each other for no reason, and the rest of the tribes were affected. And in the center of the riot, where the three Khals were fighting each other, shouts and screams shook the sky. A drivet. Snap. Then someone overturned the brazier in the chaos. The flaming brazier was thrown onto the thatched and mud wall, and the fire suddenly burned fiercely. At this time, all the cows, blood guards and their tribesmen trapped inside discovered that the door of the reed hall had been locked from the outside at some point. Open the door. A blood guard of Cal Jacko stepped forward and kicked the door. Bang, but the door seemed to be blocked by a heavy object on the outside, and it did not move at all after a kick. Everyone in the hall panicked. If you are not a fool and calm down at this time, you can find that there are many doubts in the whole thing. From the beginning of the conflict to the complete loss of control, it seems to be proceeding step by step in an orderly manner, until the last fire began to burn. However, at this time, no one can really calm down. Jayako Cal's eyes turned quickly, and he desperately thought about countermeasures. The reckless Pono Cal led his blood guards and tribesmen to break open the door and escape, while the white-haired Moso Cal had already fallen in a pool of blood. Then, a figure slowly walked out of the blazing fire. His footsteps were heavy, and his figure was distorted by the flames burning around him. All the Dothraki trapped in the hall saw him, and then they felt their breathing stagnated. The resourceful Jayako Cal and the brave Pono Cal saw the newcomer, and stared at him with their eyes wide open, shocked beyond words. The two powerful Cals seemed to have seen a living ghost, revealing a look of horror. Then he rolled his throat, and swallowed a mouthful of saliva, stepped back a few steps. His knees were a little weak, and he couldn't help but kneel on the ground with a thud. Cal Pono knelt on the ground, and grasped the handle of the knife on his waist. His throat rolled again. He wanted to rush over and kill the other party with a knife, but he didn't have the courage after all. The riot in V's Dothraki lasted for a night. It seemed that every time the Cal changed, there would be a fight. After a night, all the Dothraki who participated in it were exhausted and finally stopped fighting. Then they received a message. Except for the old soldiers of Cal Moza, everyone looked at each other, not knowing what had happened. Cal Moza was killed in the melee, while Cal Jacko and Cal Pono suddenly knelt to a mysterious Cal named Death who came from nowhere. Cal Mengo? Viserys frowned slightly. He seemed to have heard of this name. He seemed to be the first Cal to unify the Dothraki. His name was Death. But this Mengo Cal is definitely not the Mengo Cal of the past. Viserys was a little curious about this person. He didn't know how he could make Cal Bona and Cal Jacko kneel without any soldiers. You know, Dothraki people are all hot-tempered. They will draw their swords at a disagreement, let alone kneel down and surrender. The second news came from Taurus. This is a port city on the northwest coast of Slavers Bay, close to the Sea of Sighs, the Sea of Smoke and the ruins of Illyria. Recently, the area of the Sea of Smoke seems to be expanding rapidly, and it has swallowed up many fleets passing through here. The grey fog continued to spread, and all the fleets that were unlucky enough to be included never came out again. Some people even claimed that they had witnessed the figure of a sea monster in the grey fog. Viserys thought it was just a rumor, and didn't pay much attention to it. However, the relic of Gillian that was placed in his room recently, the faceless statue, suddenly changed its posture. Viserys remembered that her head was facing left, but now it was facing right, facing the head of Viserys' bed in the bedroom. At the same time, some grey mist was escaping from around the statue. Chapter 308 Grey Fog Riot. Andalus. In the evening, the sun sets. The light in Viserys' bedroom in the castle is a little dim, and the corridor is unusually quiet. He returned to Andalus a few days ago to deal with some things, and returned to his room in the evening to find a document. However, he accidentally found the inconspicuous statue placed on his bedroom table, which seemed to be a little different from before. The red clouds outside the window stretched his figure, and Viserys made a puzzled sound. This is. Then he reached out and picked up the small stone sculpture from the table and gently wiped the dust on the surface with his fingers. In addition to this stone sculpture, there is a bronze mirror that has long been unclear on Viserys' table, and a bronze candlestick full of rust. These are the things left after Gillian was eliminated. After absorbing the black fog attached to their surface, Viserys did not find anything special about them, so he did not pay too much attention to them. He kept them on his table and left them in the castle of Andalus. Recently, he returned to Andalus and lived for a few days, and then he discovered their abnormality. These things that Gillian had brought out of the Valyrian ruins all gave off a thin layer of grey mist. Viserys took a light breath and then he was choked and coughed continuously. It was obvious that these grey mists had no benefit to the human body, and the smoke sea that enveloped the Valyrian ruins was full of such thick fog. Then Viserys thought of the various rumors that Ramsay had recently collected from the streets. Sailors who traveled to and from Pentus were certain that the area of the smoke sea was expanding and constantly swallowing passing ships. His former employer was swallowed up by the thick fog of the smoke sea and never came out again. He also knew someone who could confirm his point of view. Taurus and Elia, two cities near the Valyrian ruins, were full of people discussing this matter. The locals were all panicked, claiming that the wronged souls of Valyria had resurrected and were looking for revenge everywhere. At the beginning, Viserys actually always treated this matter as a joke, because according to his memory, he did not remember such a thing happening. Although the progress of this world was advanced, there was nothing that came out of nothing. Is it really a rumor? However, Viserys thought about it carefully afterwards and felt that this matter did not seem to be groundless. There have been such rumors about this matter for a long time. It was not the first time that Viserys heard such a story, but it was only now that more people paid attention to it and it officially fermented. The wronged soul of Valyria. Viserys did not know the true face of the end of the world in the wrath of the gods. But can a shattered continent and a destroyed civilization stir up any more waves? He felt that the sudden riot in the ruins of Valyria should be related to his black fog. After all, if it is said that something comes out of nothing, then his black fog should be the biggest feature that distinguishes him from others. And this black fog has never appeared in the memory of the previous life. Of course, Viserys is also a meticulous person. He has not doubted whether there may be something wrong with his memory. Some things can be remembered, and some things cannot be remembered. Or he is Viserys, but an unknown existence has injected the predicted trajectory and a false memory of the previous life into his body. So he changed from Viserys to Viserys. As far as he knew, the old gods and the red gods seemed to have such power. However, the silver-haired young man did not indulge in self-doubt too much, otherwise he would have gone crazy before he could solve the answer. After all, his travel to this world has changed the progress of this world. The gods did not interfere, or perhaps they had not noticed it. The black fog accompanied him, and he had been tempting Viserys to explore the ruins of Valyria. There must be the answer to the matter there. Viserys held a faceless one-horned goddess statue in his hand, and couldn't help but murmur slightly. Then he put the stone statue in his hand back on the table, and then found the big box that once stored the dragon eggs, and put it in with the bronze mirror, candlestick, and broken urn that were found with it. Snap. Then he closed the lid and added several layers of locks to prevent them from doing anything else. And Viserys didn't like anyone turning their heads to look at him when he was sleeping, not even the statue. After finishing all these things, Viserys sat on the bed and thought for a while. Then he stood up and paced back and forth in the room for a while, and finally decided to go to the ruins of Valyria in person after all the recent matters were settled. We can't delay it any longer. The ruins of Valyria have already seen terrible riots, and God knows what will happen if we delay it any longer. The dissipated grey fog swallowed up the whole world. What's more, the center of the problem lies with him. Others can be unhurried, but Viserys must be vigilant. Now his territory is thousands of miles away from the ruins of Valyria. It is not realistic to lead troops to conquer the ruins of Valyria. Viserys can only ride a dragon and rush over to explore it himself. Although there are many dangers in the ruins of Valyria, Viserys has Valyrian to help. In addition, he himself is no longer immortal, and he has mastered several extraordinary means. Even if he really encounters any danger, he can turn it into a safe place. There is nothing to worry about. Take advantage of the opportunity of Robert's decisive battle with the White Walkers, although it is still elusive now. When Viserys gradually sorted out his thoughts, he already knew what to do next. The harness that Viserys found Master Top to order not long ago has been made. It can make Viserys sit on the dragon's back more comfortable, and it will not make Valyrian feel awkward. After all, no creature except humans likes to put too many things on themselves. They still prefer to run naked. And Master Top also talked to Viserys about Gendry for a long time. He really wanted to teach this child the skills at the bottom of the box, but he didn't expect that this child was scared away by the blood sacrifice and ran away to become a guard. Now Master Tob no longer has to carry the hammer to forge Gian himself. He has become an official of the kingdom's craftsmen and tools. This is a new position created by Viserys, although he is not qualified to attend the royal council now. But in the future, Viserys hopes to promote this process. Now he is the Prime Minister, Captain of the King's Guard, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lord Chancellor of the Admiralty, Minister of Justice, Grand Secretary and the King. Chapter 309 A New Journey. Viserys listened to Master Tob's chatter patiently without saying much, just shook his head. Everyone has their own aspirations. Gendra's unwillingness to forge Gian is also his own wish. Viserys didn't want this poor child to come here. However, he came to Andalus by mistake, and Viserys would not implicate and persecute the other party because of his father. He would not do such a despicable thing. Therefore, let Gendry be an ignorant person and grow up freely. But speaking of the Prime Minister, after returning to Andalus, the old Earl Joffrey, the Hand of the King who stayed here to preside over the overall situation, took the initiative to find Viserys. The old man asked him to resign from the current position of the Hand of the King and concentrate on the construction of the Dragonstone Navy. The reason why Earl Joffrey resigned from the Hand of the King was simple. Although Viserys trusted him very much and even regarded him as his adoptive father and gave him such a high position, the old man was indeed a little powerless to do it. He wanted to do everything well, so he took control of the power of the country when Viserys was still young in his early years and gradually gave up power when Viserys grew up. But Joffrey's ability to govern is really not good. He was forced to flee his family at the age of 16 because he killed the heir of a rival family. He began to wander around the world and worked as a mercenary and a sailor. If he was asked to kill, he could do it without hesitation. As the commander-in-chief of the Dragonstone fleet for so many years, he was also experienced in commanding naval battles, but he made a mess of it as the Hand of the King. It has been like this since Viserys was young, and many things have been messed up by the old man. Even after so many years, Joffrey is still a layman in handling government affairs and has not made much progress. In addition, he is getting older and older now, and his energy is gradually unable to keep up with the pace of young people. He has a good strategic overall view and knows that the next goal of the kingdom must be to attack Westeros and regain the Iron Throne. He hoped that he could shine and burn his remaining light on the battlefield, so the old Earl decided to give up the position of Prime Minister and return the power to Viserys. Let him find another suitable candidate, and he concentrated all his energy on training new naval forces. After all, the new warships have gradually been put in place. With the assistance of Pentis' powerful shipbuilding industry, the scale of the Dragonstone fleet is now even greater than its peak period. And since the next goal of the kingdom is to attack Westeros, the navy will inevitably undertake extremely important tasks. Earl Joffrey also does not want the troops he brought out to fail on the battlefield. Viserys was a little confused when he just received the old Earl's resignation. The old man has been the king's hand for so many years, and Viserys has been accustomed to having such a big steward, but he didn't expect him to resign suddenly at this time. But the old man's reasons are also very sufficient. He said that he is not the material for the king's hand. He hopes to return to his job and train the navy for the kingdom. Since Viserys knew the other party's thoughts, he did not play the drama of asking for resignation 3 times. People in this world value honor and have direct ideas. If Viserys rejected the old Earl's resignation, the other party might think that Viserys really needed him as the king's hand. Then even if he felt uncomfortable, he had to hold on to this position. Viserys accepted the old Earl's resignation and made him the Minister of the Sea of the Kingdom and the Commander-in-Chief of the Dragonstone fleet again. The medal of the Hand of the King was not taken back and left to the old Earl as a souvenir. And the position of the Prime Minister was vacant, and someone with matching status and ability was needed to replace it. Who should be chosen? The grey-haired old man proposed a candidate for his successor. But in fact, Viserys had already thought of this candidate without Joffrey proposing it. That is Oberyn Martell, the Prince of Dorne. Dorne is Targaryen's most important ally, and Prince Doran has always been very supportive of Viserys. Oberyn has stayed in Essos for so many years, and has not even returned home, so he has naturally contributed a lot. Moreover, Oberyn once obtained 6 links of the bachelor's degree in the Citadel. If he had focused on the path of the bachelor, He might have become the youngest doctor in the Citadel. When he left the Citadel, his mentor was also very sorry. These are enough to show that Oberyn has a flexible mind and profound knowledge. As the successor of Joffrey, he has identity, status, merits, and brains. The best candidate for the position of King's Hand is Oberyn. Now that the candidate has been finalized, a few days later, that is, at this moment, after installing the equipment on the dragon, Viserys set off for the Barren Mountain camp. However, Viserys did not take the connecting flight this time. Oberyn's 2nd Legion is stationed very close to Andalus, and it can be reached in less than half a day on horseback. Viserys only brought a few guards, and rode a fast horse to the Barren Mountain camp. This place is located in a narrow passage between two mountains. From the map, it seems to be a narrow passage, but in reality it is also a wide plain. This is an ancient Valyrian road. It leads directly to the Bay of Loras along the Upper Rhine River, where you can take a boat to the sea and go directly to Loras. It is the main trade route between Loras and Andalus. If you continue to walk along this ancient road, you can reach the Battle Axe Cape as far as possible. If you turn into the road among the mountains halfway, you can reach Northus. Therefore, the geographical location here is extremely important. If this pass is blocked, no army can attack Andalus from here, which can be regarded as the facade of protecting Andalus. Since the construction of this camp was approved, Viserys has come here once, and the specific site selection was given to Oberyn to choose. This semi-permanent camp is almost equivalent to a castle, and can be stationed for a long time. Viserys' sudden visit surprised Oberyn. Then Viserys made his intention clear, and Oberyn hesitated. Then, unexpectedly, Oberyn politely declined. He did not want to be the Prime Minister. Your Majesty, I'm not suitable to be the Hand of the King. The Hand of the King is the right-hand man of the King and the face of the country. Oberyn believes that he is not suitable for such an important position. However, he also heard Viserys' idea. The silver-haired young man decided to travel for a while. Oberyn also agreed to temporarily take over the position of the Hand of the King during Viserys' absence. He will personally rush to Pentos to help assist his niece Rhaenys in handling state affairs. The Legion will be left to Ser Avon. Then Viserys and Oberyn returned to Andalus, and flew to Pentos on a dragon. That night, Viserys convened the royal council in Pentos City, and explained the whole matter. He said that he would be away for a while, but he did not specify where he was going. During this period, the eldest Princess Rhaenys would be the regent, and her uncle Oberyn would temporarily take over the position of the Hand of the King, to assist Her Royal Highness the Princess in the regent. Then, a few days later, Viserys rode on a dragon, and disappeared over the Sea of Clouds. Chapter 310 Maya. Volantis is a southern coastal city on the continent of Essos, and is the most southeastern of the many free trade cities. It is located in the delta area at the four estuaries of the Rhine River. Because Volantis is the earliest colony established by the Valyrian Free Fortress, it has a long history and is powerful. Therefore, it is known as the eldest daughter of Valyria, Queen of the Rhine River, Mistress of the Summer Sea and other titles. Looking down from the clouds, it is located next to a huge bay, and to its north is the Valano River, a tributary of the Rhine River. The surrounding towns, such as Sahoru Town, Valessa Town, and Verons Town, are all under the jurisdiction of Volantis. There is also a road that can go directly from Volantis to Meereen and the Slavers Bay. However, the environment between the two places is harsh and too dangerous, so people call this road the Devil's Road. Volantis is very big, I told you. Eamon. A red-haired girl was sitting directly opposite Viserys, gently wiping the dagger in her hand, and then spoke. The name Eamon was a pseudonym that Viserys casually gave himself. It was mainly because it was easy to pronounce. When asked, he thought of this name first, and then he casually called himself Eamon. And Prince Eamon, the Dragon Rider, is also generally regarded as the noblest knight so far. While the girl wiping the dagger was talking, she was still quietly observing Viserys' expression. Her face was not very beautiful, just ordinary, but she had a good figure, and looked very healthy and agile. The girl sat directly opposite Viserys, surrounded by a bustling crowd, noisy and chaotic, playing finger-guessing games and drinking, making loud noises, the floor above their head creaking, and there was also a woman's undisguised moaning. This is a tavern in Volantis, located on the Long Bridge, which spans the estuary of the Rhine River and connects the two districts of Volantis together. The Long Bridge has a very long span, supported by huge piers, and is as flat as a road. It was built by the Valyrians in their heyday. The entrances at both ends of the Long Bridge are arches made of black boulders, with sphinxes, manticores, dragons and other monsters carved on the doors. The bridge deck is large enough for 2 four-wheeled carriages to pass side by side. Various buildings have been built on both sides of the Long Bridge, and almost anything can be bought here. Now Viserys and the girl named Maya, dressed as a mercenary, are eating on the second floor of a tavern on the Long Bridge. The consumption level here is not high, so there are all kinds of people, including a large number of poor people, mercenaries, prostitutes, slaves, and sailors from afar. From the angle where Viserys is sitting now, he can also see the hands of thieves and the heads of prisoners on the Long Bridge below being impaled on spears for public display. You are right, Ma. Volantis is indeed very big. Viserys looked at the head that had just been chopped off below, which was still dripping with blood, and then was picked up on the spear, and there were even cheers around. Then he turned around and spoke in a teasing manner. And the people are tough. The person who was just executed was not a criminal who had committed a heinous crime, but a runaway slave. His master executed him to warn other slaves. The tiger-robed soldiers with tiger stripes on their cheeks, who were the guards of Volantis, seemed not to see it, and let the slave owner throw away his own property. Slaves are part of Volantis culture. Maya had just seen the scene below, and spoke without hesitation. It has been like this since the days of the Valyrian freehold. Almost every free citizen has more than 5 slaves on average. Of course, the average has always been a hooligan. Poor free citizens can't even afford to eat, so how can they afford slaves? The slaves owned by the big slave owners can almost form a small mercenary group. Oh, Maya, why do you want to explore the ruins of Valyria? Viserys didn't continue the previous topic, but took a bite of the dish on the table, then raised his head and asked. This girl was someone Viserys met when he just came to Volantis a few days ago. She is a member of a mercenary group, codenamed Hunter. She is best at getting behind the enemy without making any noise and then slitting their throats. The recent riots in the Sea of Smoke are the hottest topic in Volantis. Some people claim that the Valyrian ruins have become more dangerous, while others think that this is the best opportunity to make a fortune. The secrets and wealth buried in the freehold will all emerge from the ground, and you can make a fortune by picking up a few things at that time. Maya is one of those people who thinks this is an opportunity to make a fortune, so she joined an expedition team preparing to go to Valyria. When the expedition team was open for recruitment, Viserys also volunteered to join it. The silver-haired young man has a handsome face and good skills. He took down the mercenary named Butcher in a few moves, and won the favor of the boss who organized the expedition team this time. So Viserys joined the expedition team under the alias Eamon. After joining the expedition team, Viserys realized that the scale of this operation was very large, and the boss behind the scenes was even more noble. He is one of the 3 governors of Volantis, Malacha Megia of the Tiger Party. He organized a total of 20 ships of different sizes and an expedition team of nearly 1,000 people, most of whom were slaves. There were also many mercenaries like Maya and Viserys who had dreams. Of course it's for money. What else could it be? Maya heard Viserys' question, looked at him strangely, and then spoke as a matter of course. What else? What do you want to do, Eamon? Of course I do it for money. Viserys leaned back and supported the back of the chair behind him. Really? Maya looked at Viserys suspiciously. But I don't think you are a person who is short of money. Maya's eyes fell on Viserys' clothes. Although the clothes Viserys wore were also ordinary and nothing special. But for some reason, Eamon's behavior and the impression he gave her were like a person of noble status and who had been in a high position for many years. Every word and action of his carried a special feeling. You think too much. Viserys just shrugged slightly in the face of Maya's questioning eyes and spoke naturally. I'm just not that poor. And I like adventure, and I want to see what the ruins of Valyria look like. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel. Mundo fanfic novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 311 Expedition. The adventure team was scheduled to start the journey in half a month. During this time, Viserys naturally had nothing to do, so he followed Maya to wander around Volantis. Take a look at the current appearance of this city, once known as the City of Flowers and Fountains. The girl looked similar to Rhaenys. Both of them looked heroic, but Maya was much older than Rhaenys, even 2 years older than Viserys. Her long red hair was tied into a ponytail, revealing her fair neck, and she was wearing a clean and neat khaki linen dress. There were 2 daggers tied to her thighs, and Viserys knew that there was also a pocket rapier in her sleeves, which was actually her ultimate weapon. She had killed quite a few people. Viserys looked at the girl's back and narrowed his eyes slightly. Maya was a native of Volantis. As she said, on average, every free citizen of Volantis owned more than 5 slaves. But she didn't have any. Her parents died long ago, but fortunately she was a noble free citizen of Volantis, not a lowly slave. Therefore, no matter how poor she was, as long as she did not degenerate, she would not be forced to do some disgusting work. Maya relied on her own hard work to become a mercenary. She once served in the cat group and later joined other small mercenary groups. With her ferocity, she killed a high-ranking mercenary who wanted to do something bad to her, cut off his thing, and fed it to the dog. From then on, Maya established her special status in the mercenary group. Other men did not dare to provoke her easily, and she no longer had to fight in person. But this time, for some reason, she suddenly took a great risk to join the expedition team to explore the ruins of Valyria. For money? Maya did not think Viserys was a person who lacked money, because his sitting etiquette and other aspects, his every move revealed that he had received a very good aristocratic education. And Viserys also felt that Maya should not be for this reason. For money is just an excuse that the two of them tacitly found. The final reason was the lost civilization shrouded in grey fog. Then, a few more days passed. It had been a long time since Viserys came to Volantis. Because it was inconvenient to hide his body, Balerion had already hidden on an uninhabited desert island in the sea, and would call it again when needed. The silver-haired young man had been wandering around the city openly during this period, visiting this once prosperous city-state without any hesitation. Although it is now in the decline, there is a lot of bleak feeling. The large number of wars during the Tiger Party's rule dragged them down, especially the defeats. The economy of Volantis collapsed directly, and the population plummeted, and it has not recovered completely until today. And Viserys only went through a simple disguise, and made himself look ugly. Otherwise, with a face that is the most recognizable on the SS continent, he would not dare to stroll around the city of Volantis so openly. However, his long silver gold hair, which was particularly conspicuous in Pentus, was nothing special here. Volantis has a large population of people with silver hair and purple eyes. Most of these people are the bloodline of the survivors who escaped after the doomsday crisis of Valyria. They have the noble and sacred bloodline of the Freehold, which even brings some unexpected conveniences to Viserys in this city-state. When Viserys wandered around Volantis, all the slaves, free citizens, and even the defenders of Volantis showed, or when they saw Viserys, and the mercenaries from other places couldn't help but stay away from the people with silver hair and purple eyes. Such distinctive Valyrian features often come from ancient family bloodlines, and they have great power in Volantis. You must know that in Volantis, only those whose ancestors can be traced back to the ancient bloodline of Valyria can become archons. Give me a sword. Viserys came to a blacksmith shop. He held a brilliant coin with a skull engraved on the back in his hand, and said to the dark-skinned and sturdy boss. He spoke a very orthodox Valyrian language, but it was slightly different from the dialect in Volantis. Valyrian in different parts of the free cities was slightly different. The blacksmith thought he was a foreigner, but when he saw his silver hair, he couldn't help but lower his voice. Please choose, distinguished guest. There were many swords of different sizes and materials hanging in the blacksmith shop, including long swords, short swords, and even half-handed swords and great swords. If there was no need for special customization, these would be enough to meet the needs of ordinary mercenaries. Viserys was not so picky. His own sword was made of the heart of the stars, which naturally could not bring dusk. The characteristics of that sword were too obvious, and almost everyone could recognize who he was with that sword. When he was tested, before joining the expedition, Viserys even defeated the mercenary codenamed Butcher with his bare hands. The Butcher was not brave at all, but seemed a little clumsy in front of Viserys. Viserys dodged his 3 consecutive slashes, then seized the opportunity to grab the blade with his bare hands and put it on the opponent's neck, winning cheers from the whole room. Maya, who introduced him, was also there. The Butcher blushed, feeling a little embarrassed, and looked at Viserys with a little more resentment. However, Viserys didn't care about the resentment of a small mercenary for the so-called face. Such a person would not even have the chance to kneel on the ground and lick his shoes on weekdays. Viserys didn't deliberately humiliate the other party, but just passed the assessment and defeated him normally. Viserys was too tired to consider these. If he revealed his identity, the other party would not only not be resentful, but would also beg his majesty to forgive his disrespect. This one. Hula. Viserys picked up a sword, pulled it out, and looked at it. He didn't choose to carefully, but just chose a long sword that looked similar. Then he put it on his waist, and paid for it. Although he did not bring his own sword, Viserys still brought a portable Valyrian steel dagger, which would be useful if needed. As for the armor, Viserys wore a set of light leather armor. With the ability of Black Mist, the effect of the armor on him was greatly reduced, so it was better to increase his agility. Then, a long time passed. Finally, it was time for the expedition team to gather and prepare to go to sea. Chapter 312, Archon of Volantis. It's nice to see you again, Eamon. In the port of Volantis, the air was filled with a strong smell of fish, flowers, fesses, and decay. Maya, the girl with a fiery red ponytail, still had 2 daggers tied to her thighs. When she saw him, she took the initiative to walk over to Viserys and greeted him. The expedition team was naturally not mandatory. Many mercenaries who joined had the right to regret before signing the contract. After all, everyone knew that exploring the ruins of Valyria was very dangerous and could be considered a life or death struggle. No one would choose such a path unless they were forced into a desperate situation. But unfortunately, there are many people in this world who are forced into a desperate situation. I'm not sure if I'm happy to see you, Ma. Viserys, who was wearing leather armor, heard Ma's voice, turned around and looked at the girl in front of him, shook his head and said, Ma was the first Volantis he met, and it was also the first time that Viserys made a friend as an ordinary person, after putting down his king's heirs and coming to this world. In fact, compared to being a high and mighty king, with countless people watching his every word and action, Viserys' freedom in Volantis these days seems to be more in line with his inner yearning, because he was an ordinary person in his previous life. This is a dangerous idea. Robert thought so too, and then he died. Since becoming a king is like a canary trapped in a cage, of course he can't do whatever he wants, so Viserys cherishes this opportunity to go out alone. But it is precisely because of this that Viserys joked that he didn't want to see the girl because the Valyrian ruins were full of dangers. Maya's personality is lively and straightforward, and she naturally understands that it is not that Viserys doesn't want to see her friend, but that he is worried about her being in danger. It's okay, I'm happy to see you. The girl looked optimistic, squinting her beautiful eyes, and said with a smile, Maya's appearance may have flaws, and she is not a beautiful girl, but her eyes are beautiful and sunny. I believe the gods will bless me. If he wanted me to die, I would have died many years ago. Viserys' brows relaxed slightly when he heard Maya's words, revealing a little smile. It was really good to chat freely, instead of facing all kinds of stereotyped respectful faces every day, and Maya's optimistic attitude also affected him, and his mood became much more comfortable. Do you know the route we are going this time? No, we are not qualified to know such secrets. Maya shook her head like a rattle. These are secrets that only the big guys can know. That's right. Viserys thought about it and nodded in approval, without asking further questions. In his hand, he actually had a route map drawn by Gillian. In theory, this route could pass through the layers of obstacles in the Sea of Smoke and finally reach this lost civilization. But so many years have passed, and now the grey fog is rioting what kind of things and changes must have happened in the sea of smoke, and Viserys didn't know whether this route map is still useful now. However, he did not expect to succeed in the exploration in one go. He mainly followed the main force and let them explore the way. If he failed this time, he could still summon Balerion to take him out and look for the next opportunity. However, when Viserys and Maya were chatting, woo, a melodious horn sounded from the port of Volantis. 20 warships of different sizes were ready, and there were thousands of explorers standing on the coast, most of whom were slaves. The Archons of Volantis were powerful. The Tiger Party had lost its status as a dominant party for nearly 300 years, since the end of the War of the Bloody Century. The Elephant Party has always firmly controlled the Volantis government, and maintained more than 2 seats as Archons. Viserys and Maya were not very noticeable standing in the vast crowd. He met the boss who organized this operation, the only Archon of the Tiger Party, Malachami Jaya. This was an old man who had lost all his teeth, and had little hair left. However, he was still fully dressed in armor, while riding on the back of an elephant, with bright eyes, living up to the reputation of a tiger. This is an old tiger. It's best not to provoke him, if it's not necessary. Eamon. Maya explained in a low voice in Viserys' ear. Viserys claimed to be an adventurer from Tyrosh in the expedition team. Tyrosh is not far from Volantis, but not too close either. There are also many people with silver hair and purple eyes like Viserys in Tyrosh, so it's not a strange thing. Moreover, Tyrosh is very close to Westeros, so some of the residents on the island can speak the common language of Westeros, and Viserys can switch between the 2 languages seamlessly, so there is naturally no doubt. Viserys nodded slightly after hearing what the girl said. Yes, I know. Then, feeling the stern eyes of the personal guards of the Melatra Archon, the 2 of them shut up together, not wanting to cause trouble for themselves. The late Tiger Malachamika, dressed in military uniform, was sitting on the back of an elephant, his back straight and his voice loud, while Viserys below was not interested. He had heard this kind of stereotyped morale boosting cliché countless times, and he had always played the role of a speaker before. He thought that his impassioned speech had inspired the soldiers and boosted their morale. But now, mixed in the crowd, Viserys only heard the low sneers of the people around him, and the question of whether this old man could still be raised. So this is what it feels like to listen to a lecture below. Viserys had not listened to a lecture for a long time, so he had forgotten this feeling. Now it seemed that he would have to speak less in the future. And just when Viserys was a little distracted, the old Archon Malacha finally finished his speech, and then the old man rode an elephant and left the scene surrounded by guards. Of course, he would not go alone. Everyone knows that exploring the ruins of Valyria is a life and death matter, and Volantis had failed several times in it before. History has proven that more people do increase the chances of survival, but no one can guarantee that they will be the lucky one. This expedition is just a counterattack by the Tiger Party, hoping to find some ancient technology, precious treasures, or even magic, dragon eggs, etc. left by Valyria from the ruins. Chapter 313. Enduring Hardships. Once upon a time, Daenerys hatched a dragon, which greatly shocked Volantis. They also had the orthodox and surviving blood of Valyrian nobles, so Volantis bought dragon eggs all over the world, hoping to turn a bicycle into a motorcycle. But dragon eggs are not stones that are everywhere, and they are not so easy to buy. Illyrio could buy 3 unhatched dragon eggs from ancient times in distant Ashay, because the dragons had become extinct at that time, and no one had been able to hatch dragons again for nearly 100 years. Therefore, dragon eggs gradually circulated and could be bought with money. Now that dragon eggs can be hatched again, who doesn't want to try it for themselves if they hold dragon eggs, just in case they are the chosen one? Because of this, Volantis' journey to buy dragon eggs was not so smooth, and fearless scammers gathered here. Most of the scammers with poor counterfeiting craftsmanship were identified and beheaded, but some of them still made mistakes and eventually bought some gorgeous stones. Although the governors of Volantis are elected once a year, they can be re-elected without limit. Now the old governor of the Tiger Party, Malacha, is old and should have retired. However, there is a lack of successors within the party, and the young people of the Tiger Party are not up to the task. Therefore, the Tiger Party spent so much money to organize an expedition this time, just to seize the opportunity to find something to counterattack the Elephant Party. In the final analysis, this is still a party struggle. Crash. The huge warship rode the wind and broke through the roaring waves. Viserys just listened to Maya's description of the party struggle in Volantis. Generally speaking, Volantis is a two-party competition system, which is a bit familiar. Their goal is to conquer the world, while the Elephant Party hopes to conquer through trade and the Tiger Party hopes to conquer through force. That's all. The young man with long silver gold hair is now sitting on the deck, with his hair tied into a braid. There is a long sword at his hand, a dagger on his waist, metal wrist guards and brown leather armor. He looks a bit cool, like a Lone Ranger. Not long ago, Viserys' move was amazing. He solved the opponent cleanly and neatly. A rich businessman took a fancy to him and wanted to hire him as a guard. There were also several small mercenary groups that extended olive branches to Viserys, but Viserys did not accept it. At this moment, he was sitting on the deck with a wine jug in his hand, looking up and drinking a sip of boiled water in it. Then he looked up at the grey sky above his head. Today is not a good weather for going out to sea. Today's sky is a little gloomy, the wind is howling, and the sea has become much more irritable. Perhaps there will be a storm soon. That's right. The girl with long red hair also looked a little worried. Although she was not an excellent sailor, such bad weather was obviously not suitable for long voyages. A sailor suggested to the commander of this expedition, that is, Malacha's butler, but the other party refused to return to the port and insisted on moving forward. Many sailors had no choice but to obey the other party's orders and continue to sail towards the direction of the Sea of Smoke. Then, not too long after, a small storm really came. The sky on the sea changed suddenly. The sky that was just grey was suddenly covered with dark clouds, and the weak sunlight disappeared completely. The wind was howling, the sea was roaring, and a downpour fell without warning. The big raindrops hit the faces of the adventurers and slaves on the deck. Quick! Tighten the rope. The first mate on the ship was shouting and directing the sailors to control the ship. Naturally, the slaves and adventurers on the ship were not idle and came forward to help. Because everyone knows that water and fire are ruthless. Once the ship capsizes here, I'm afraid no one will be able to go back alive. It's impossible to swim back even in calm waters, let alone now in the rough sea. Crackling, raindrops slammed crazily on the deck and everyone's cheeks, and the huge waves hit the hull of the warship. Some unlucky people were accidentally swept away by the waves and screamed and disappeared on the deck in an instant. However, at this time, no one had time to save people. Where is the bucket? Quick, quick, block it with a wooden board. Viserys and Maya were also helping, and their clothes were all wet, looking a little embarrassed. Fortunately, this storm did not last very long. I don't know how long it took. Just when everyone was exhausted, the raging waves around finally calmed down gradually. The heavy rain turned into a drizzle until it finally stopped completely. I don't know when the dark clouds above my head quietly dissipated, and the red glow of the sunset broke the haze in the sky and sprinkled all over the silent sea. The sparkling sea reflected the red glow, and the seagulls flew and made crisp chirps. How it's finally over. The red-haired girl lay on the deck exhausted, her chest heaving slightly. Regardless of the fact that the water stains on the deck had not been wiped off, her whole body was already soaked. Viserys also sat beside her in a somewhat awkward manner, but he performed better than the girl. The silver-haired young man looked at the beautiful scenery in the distance, then remained silent and took another sip from the wine jug. Viserys didn't have many friends on this ship. After all, he was a person who came to Volantis for the first time and tried to keep a low profile. Maya had been in Volantis for a long time and was a well-known figure in the mercenary circle, but she also didn't have many friends. "Are you okay, Maya?" A tall bald man with tattoos all over his body came over, followed by several brothers, and greeted Maya. "It's okay." The red-haired girl sat up and shook her head. Pa, then raised her hand and clapped his hands with the other party. The big man nodded and looked at Viserys, who was sitting next to her warily, but did not say hello, and then turned and left. Viserys did not care and took another sip from the wine pot and looked at the others back. He is called Gus Iron Fist, a famous mercenary in Volantis, the leader of the Iron Corps. Maya sat up from the deck and stroked her long red hair slightly, then introduced him. You don't have a title yet, Eamon. For a powerful mercenary, the name is more important than strength. But I think with your strength, you can quickly make a name for yourself in Volantis, if you follow me. There were still drops of water on the girl's face, but her chest was patting, and even jumping a few times, and her dark eyes were sincere. Maya's purpose of making friends with Viserys, who was aliased as Eamon, was actually very simple. Her dream was to establish her own mercenary group. After that, there were no more accidents in the remaining days of the voyage. On the morning of the last day, the sailor holding the telescope finally saw the grey fog covering the sky. We have arrived at the Sea of Smoke. Chapter 314. Entering the Sea of Smoke. The shouts of the sailors were like thunder in the plain, making the quiet cabins and decks in the early morning suddenly lively. Thump, thump, thump. All the adventurers who were resting in the cabins ran out, and the sailors who were dozing on the deck suddenly shuddered and became energetic. What? Have we arrived at the Sea of Smoke? Is this the Devil's Land? Many people on the big ship rushed to the deck and looked into the distance. Although Volantis was very close to this ancient and mysterious lost civilization, and they had all heard of such a name, almost everyone present was only coming to this vast Sea of Smoke for the first time. Usually, the fleet would quickly bypass this place when it was far away. This is a sea full of gunpowder and lava. According to legend, before the Doomsday Catastrophe, the Sea of Smoke was once a land connected to the continent of Essos. However, the catastrophe of the wrath of the gods shattered the Valyrian peninsula, blasting this continent into pieces, and the seawater poured into the sunken land, forming the current Sea of Smoke. The seawater here is boiling all year round, and there are erupting volcanoes and smoking reefs under the sea. There are even legends that there may be demons and sea monsters. Viserys and Maya naturally ran out, but the two of them did not live in the same cabin because of gender. Viserys and the other 3 male adventurers stayed in a cabin to rest, while Maya and the few female adventurers gathered together. For the boring and tedious life on the sea, such a division can reduce a lot of unnecessary trouble. Yesterday, a mercenary who couldn't control his lower body sneaked to the woman's side, but this group of female mercenaries were naturally not vegetarians. They were caught and thrown into the sea to feed the fish. So this is what the Sea of Smoke looks like. The ships arranged their formations and continued to sail forward. After a while, the distance was closer, and even without a telescope, they could see clearly. Then an adventurer sighed. Viserys also held the board and looked into the distance. There was a place that was clearly separated from the sky by a hazy fog, and the grey fog kept rolling, like a huge monster breathing heavily, which made people shudder. Even the shadows of lightning and thunder could be seen faintly in the grey fog. The Sea of Smoke is too big. I'm afraid it will eat us in one bite. The red-haired girl standing next to Viserys couldn't help but sigh while holding the railing. Her voice was a little low and suppressed, and she spoke the thoughts of all the mercenaries around. The rolling grey fog was like the devil's open mouth of the abyss. The expedition team of thousands of people on 20 warships looked mighty. However, in front of this rolling grey fog that covered the sky, it was as small as a little ant, and the other party could swallow them all effortless. God bless, I hope I can come back alive this time. Then someone started to pray first, and then all kinds of voices rang out together. Great Lord of Light, Lady Weeping, you. Some prayed to the Lord of Light, some prayed to the Lady Weeping of Lies, and some prayed to the Black Goat God, and some even prayed to the 7 gods. However, the followers of the Lord of Light accounted for the vast majority. The belief in Ra was extremely popular in Volantis, and was generally among the middle and lower classes. Most of his followers were poor people or slaves, and even half of the Tiger Cloak army were followers of the Lord of Light. However, the red-haired girl was not among them. She did not believe in religion. Because she had experienced hardships since childhood, she prayed to the gods countless times, but never received a response. From then on, she knew that she had to rely on herself for everything, and praying to the gods would not get any response. That's why she fought back at that time, and cut off the opponent's thing with a knife, and fed it to the dog. 20 warships were still constantly approaching the huge mouth of the abyss filled with grey fog, and the sunlight above everyone's head was slowly being blocked, and the light gradually dimmed, getting closer and closer. The prayers of the crowd became hurried. There were many people on the deck who regretted not wanting to die at the last minute. They strongly demanded that the fleet turn around and return to Volantis. However, as an employer, the Tiger Party was very generous when spending money. For this operation, it can be said that they spent money lavishly. They did not hesitate to organize such a large expedition team. The money was spent, and the mercenaries were paid, so they would not be soft-hearted at this time. The slave guards on the ship first warned the adventurers who were making trouble, and then caught those who did not listen to the warning, and threw them off the ship. Under the ship was the gradually boiling dark sea water. The mercenaries who were about to be thrown off the ship kept begging for mercy, but they were indifferent. In the end, they were thrown down by several guards and screamed. Then they were quickly submerged by the seawater and disappeared without even a few flutters. Everyone on the ship witnessed this scene and their faces changed slightly. It was not until then that some people finally realized that the generous rewards given for this expedition were not so easy to get. That was buying their lives in advance. Viserys frowned as he looked at the place where the man who was thrown into the sea disappeared. The ship was still moving forward, and the surroundings had become grey. Viserys looked back, and a lavender light surged in his eyes. His eyesight was good, because he saw that there seemed to be a head sticking out there, staring blankly in the direction where the ship left. Is it that person just now? Viserys clenched his fists, but his heart suddenly became more alert. No one noticed this small detail, except himself. He had already sensed the dangerous atmosphere of the Sea of Smoke. The man just now was like a ghost, with a head sticking out of the sea. A ghost lurking on the expedition ship? Or was he dead when he fell, and then transformed into a non-human creature in a short time? Viserys' thoughts turned quickly in his mind, imagining what the man looked like when he was thrown off the ship just now, but he couldn't find any flaws. The wronged ghost of Valyria. Viserys suddenly thought of the legend he had heard before. The people of Elia and Taurus claimed that the wronged spirit of Valyria was bound to this land, and they would take revenge on those who dared to trespass. Valyrian. The silver-haired young man suddenly felt uneasy, and then he called his black dragon softly in his heart. Ho! In his consciousness, the black dragon quickly responded to Viserys' call. It is now resting on an island not far from the Sea of Mist, waiting for Viserys to call it, and fly in to rescue him at any time. After receiving Valyrian's response, Viserys breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that the grey fog did not block the special perception ability between them. Don't you need to pray, Aemon? At this time, Maya's voice rang in Viserys' ears. Chapter 315 Grey Fog Murderous Intent. Viserys was just thinking about horror stories about ghosts and demons, and was fully immersed in them. However, at this moment, Maya suddenly spoke in his ear and scared him. The girl with red hair was slightly stunned when she saw Viserys' sudden reaction, and then laughed out loud. Hey, Aemon, what were you thinking about just now? Why were you scared by me? Maya's personality is straightforward and lively. She is well known in the mercenary circle of Volantis, but she doesn't have many friends. Aemon is a person with a calm personality, and can chat with her. Therefore, Maya is willing to come to Aemon to chat whenever she has something to do, and she didn't give him any face at this time. Viserys didn't care about it, but just smiled helplessly, and shook his head. I only believe in myself. Then he looked around as he spoke, and the people who were looking at him, because of this little episode, noticed his gaze and avoided it. There were many cases where mercenaries drew their swords and fought each other over a disagreement. If you don't want to cause trouble for yourself, try to do your own thing and avoid looking at others or eavesdropping on others. After entering the Sea of Smoke, everyone was very nervous at first and even skipped the time to chat. Everyone held their swords nervously and looked around vigilantly. The captain, who climbed to the highest point and looked through the telescope himself, could not see any abnormalities around him. The telescope could only see a grey haze everywhere, not even as clear as the naked eye, so the captain simply gave up the telescope. Under the command of the flagship, woo, the horn sounded. All ships moved closer to the flagship, and the fleet's formation was compressed, trying to gather together for warmth in this obstructed vision. Otherwise, it would be easy to get lost if they continued to disperse. Don't think that such a big thing as a ship can get lost on a flat sea with no obstacles. In fact, the complex situation on the sea is even more complicated than on the ground, especially now that the vision is obstructed. It is very likely that a ship has lost its way and disappeared. Viserys and his men were not on the flagship, but a large warship second only to the flagship. As for the small boats, most of them were slaves of little value. Their combat literacy was not very high. They were sent here, mainly to be used as cannon fodder in some situations in the future. In short, they were sent to die. The mercenaries who had combat capabilities and were hired at a high price stayed on the big ship, and they could hold on for a while longer when they encountered any danger. The melodious and desolate sound of the horn could arouse the blood in people's bodies when heard at close range, making people's blood boil uncontrollably. But when it entered Viserys' ears, there was a tingling feeling on his scalp. Viserys still had some peace of mind when sailing on the silent sea just now, but at this time the horn suddenly sounded, and he was very worried that he would disturb some unknown existence in the Sea of Smoke. For example, the sea monster mentioned in all the legends about the ruins of Illyria. Gillian Lannister's diary also mentioned the sea monster hidden in the Sea of Smoke. Wouldn't the sound of the horn wake them up? But it was not their fault for being careless, because the deeper they went, the lower their vision became. Even the ships that were very close to them could hardly see the figures on them. They could only see a vague shadow of a large ship. Damn it. Then, Viserys heard the captain curse and hurried past him, but he didn't know what happened. Then the silver-haired young man retracted his gaze and continued to look at the sea, but it was obvious that it was impossible to communicate with other warships by flag signals, and they could only communicate through the horn. At this time, a cough suddenly came from someone next to Viserys. Viserys looked over directly and found that it was another mercenary named Dick who lived in the same room with him. He was thin and claimed to be from Taroshi. Viserys was afraid of being exposed, so he was just a fake Taroshi, so he didn't chat with him much. And now why did Dick suddenly cough? Is he sick? Viserys frowned slightly. Being sick in this world is a very dangerous thing. Because of the underdeveloped medical level, many diseases that seem simple in later generations can kill people here. Not only Viserys, but also people who are close to Dick can't help but stay away from him. But at this time, other people around coughed. Cough 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 cough. It seems that, because someone started it, many people around began to cough. The girl with red hair beside him showed a puzzled expression, and Viserys' face suddenly changed. He suddenly remembered that he seemed to cough a few times after inhaling the grey mist emitted by the faceless goddess, but it didn't matter. It might be because the amount was small, so he didn't take it seriously at that time. Maya, cover your mouth and nose. Try to breathe less grey mist outside. Viserys reacted quickly and spoke to Maya in a hurried tone. Maya was slightly stunned. She didn't know why Eamon said that, but the other's eyes still made her subconsciously obey. Oh, okay. Maya acted quickly and quickly covered her mouth and nose with her sleeves. Several mercenaries around Viserys also heard his words. Although they didn't know what happened, they could only trust others unconditionally in this situation, where they hadn't figured out what happened. After all, it wouldn't take much to cover your mouth and nose. The expedition team had been in the Sea of Smoke for a long time without realizing it, but they hadn't encountered any danger, which made everyone relax their vigilance. But the sudden cough made everyone alert. Everyone, cover your mouth and nose. At this time, the first mate in the captain's room on the top deck shouted with a loudspeaker. At this time, others finally realized that it was probably because of breathing in the grey fog, but now people didn't know what kind of impact breathing too much of this grey fog would cause. Sea monster. Then the sudden shouting sounded like a thunder in the chaotic crowd on the deck. There's a sea monster. Oh my god. Save me. Ah, a shrill scream suddenly sounded. The grey fog continued to spread, and there was a terrifying roar on the deck, as well as the sound of clanging and fighting. Viserys watched with his own eyes as a mercenary with bloodshot eyes thrust his sword into the heart of his brother beside him. Quick, follow me. Viserys pulled Maya up and fled directly to the cabin below the deck, while others were not paying attention. Chapter 316. Killing each other. Many people gathered on the deck, and the situation was out of control. Kill. The sound of killing was everywhere. Clang clang. Viserys, holding a long sword, stood back to back with the red-haired girl, blocking the attack of a crazy mercenary. Then, the long sword in his hand went straight into the opponent's heart. Die. Puff. The sword and long sword was not as sharp as the dusk, but it still pierced the opponent's heart easily. Then Viserys raised his foot and kicked the opponent's chest with a bang and pulled out the long sword in his hand. The crazy mercenary was still trying to climb up and bite him, but the blood in his chest gushed out instantly, and the corpse lost all strength and fell to the ground. On the other side, the red-haired girl's dagger was also dripping with bright red blood. She had just cut the throat of a sailor, who panting softly. There were several crazy mercenaries with scalded eyes around, obviously staring at the two of them. It was making strange noises and chasing towards Viserys and Maya. Quick, hide inside. Viserys quickly pulled Maya off the deck and hid inside the cabin, then closed the wooden door and held it tightly with a heavy object. Bang bang. Then there was a crazy roar and banging sound outside the door. Keep running inside. The silver-haired young man was holding a bloody sword. He had just killed several people in a row and just let out a breath. His pair of lavender eyes were still very calm, without the slightest panic. Okay. Maya nodded hurriedly. Then the two of them turned around and came to an empty room inside the cabin. Bang, they closed the door tightly, and with a click, the bolt was inserted from the inside. The two of them took a short rest. The red-haired girl's chest was heaving, and she was breathing heavily. She was obviously frightened by the situation just now. She thought she might face terrible sea monsters and terrifying demons, but she never thought that such a thing would happen. After entering the sea of smoke, many people who inhale too much grey fog have begun to fall into a state of madness and delusion. They began to attack the people around them in a delirious manner and shouted, "Sea monsters! Where are the sea monsters? These sea monsters are clearly themselves." The red-haired girl took another deep breath, and then she thought of something and rolled her throat and swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Now hiding inside the cabin, she was still a little scared when she thought about the scene just now. Those fellows with red eyes started to attack their friends without any warning and even shouted to kill the sea monsters. Could it be that in their eyes, all sober humans are sea monsters? Maya thought of the time before she and Emma escaped into the cabin. Many pairs of scalded eyes had already stared at her. However, after they escaped into the cabin, they blocked the door with heavy objects, and those crazy mercenaries and sailors estimated that they would not be able to get in for a while. However, in fact, not everyone on the deck was in a frenzy, and there were still many sober people. Viserys and Maya reacted quickly and covered their mouths and noses in time to reduce the inhalation of grey fog. Some people were also physically strong, and the grey fog did not affect them much. Just like the arrival of a plague, some people with poor physical fitness or bad luck got sick and died, while some people seemed to have nothing happened. Viserys pulled Maya into the cabin and listened to the sound of fighting on the deck above their heads. "Kill the sea monster! Kill the sea monster!" This shrill roar made people feel desperate. If they hadn't seen the scene just now, Viserys and Maya might have thought that the roar was very tragic, but now they only felt a chill. Puff, plop. The sound of the long sword piercing into flesh and blood, and then the body fell heavily on the deck. The fight above Viserys and Maya's heads continued. However, the fierce battle led to an increase in human activity and increased lung capacity. Those sober people who had experienced the fight gradually inhaled grey fog that exceeded their body's endurance limit. Bloodshot gradually emerged from a pair of clear eyes, which looked like a pair of scalded eyes from a distance. A mercenary who was still holding on just now had several monsters killed by him falling down around him. However, he gradually couldn't hold on any longer. He inhaled too much grey fog and began to cough unconsciously. His brain gradually fell into chaos. At this time, he was sober and the last scene he saw was a crazy sailor rushing towards him. Then he saw the sea monster. "Hansen, what are you doing?" The sailor who rushed over raised his long sword high and then suddenly froze in midair. He blinked with a pair of scalded eyes, tilted his head slightly, and suddenly asked stiffly. Then the sailor put away his long sword and pulled Hansen, who also had red eyes, up from the ground. "Kill the sea monster quickly. We are almost victorious." Hansen's brain was in chaos, and he even forgot what had just happened. He didn't know why he fell to the ground and what was happening around him. "What are you talking about?" But after being reminded by his companions, Hansen stood up and looked around. he found that there were chopped off sea monster tentacles everywhere, some of which were still wriggling, and some people were coming forward to finish them off, and not far away there were several struggling tentacles being besieged by their companions. This is a sea monster. Hansen shuddered when he saw this scene, and then hurriedly picked up his long sword from the ground. It seemed that he should have been knocked unconscious by the sea monster just now, and his brain had not yet reacted, and forgot what happened not long ago. And now the situation is obvious. The fleet was attacked by a sea monster, and many brothers have been killed and injured. Damn sea monster. Kill the sea monster. Then Hansen didn't think much, but let out a shrill shout, and killed the sea monster tentacles that were besieged by his companions not far away. These grey fogs are not simple. And below the deck, Viserys and Maya, who were hiding in the cabin, hid in an empty room. Viserys remained calm at this time, and spoke up. His calmness made Maya relax a lot. They have very strong hallucinogenic ingredients, which made the sailors and mercenaries fall into fantasy and start killing each other. But why did they say they saw a sea monster? The red-haired girl sitting on the bed opposite had calmed down a lot at this moment. Although she was still a little nervous, she took a deep breath and spoke. Chapter 317 Miraculous Recovery. Maybe I've fallen into a state of delusion. Viserys was silent for a moment, then spoke. Everyone has heard of the legend of a sea monster in the Sea of Smoke. And the world's imagination of sea monsters is mostly limited to giant octopus, squid and other tentacle monsters. For example, the big golden squid of the Greyjoy family. There are also a few people who imagine sea monsters as huge whales. After all, even if that behemoth has not grown into a sea monster, it is still the undisputed overlord of the ocean. It's just that this kind of creature has a docile personality and does not look ferocious in appearance, so there are few legends that imagine sea monsters as whales. The root of terror actually comes from people's inner fear. Everyone has heard of sea monsters in the Sea of Smoke, and the existence of grey fog has aroused their inner fear, making them mistakenly believe that they have been attacked by sea monsters. So, the young man with silver gold hair sat on the bed, his brain working quickly and trying to explain the mystery, but his words stopped here. So, what? Eamon. Maya wiped the blood off the dagger. She was much calmer now, and then raised her head to ask, is there no way to explain why these people who were infected only attack sober humans, and not their kind? If it was just pure imagination, they should kill everyone around them. People who have fallen into madness should not be able to clearly distinguish between enemies and friends. Just now, Maya and Viserys both observed that all the red-eyed and crazy people were besieging sober humans. But they did not attack each other, and they were even able to cooperate with each other. The cooperation was perfect, without accidental injuries, just like a group of sober people. That's right. Viserys frowned and nodded after hearing Maya's words. He was indeed confused about this problem, and didn't know why such a thing happened. But because of Gillian's diary, Viserys knew more than Maya. He knew that there were indeed sea monsters in the Sea of Smoke, because Gillian had encountered it, and the people on the ship paid a huge price to finally escape to the Lost Continent. Viserys once believed in Gillian's diary, but now Viserys suddenly doubted the authenticity of this diary. He did not doubt whether this diary was forged by Gillian, just to lure him to explore the ruins of Illyria. Because even if Gillian did not lure him, he would definitely come here in the future, and this is the key to solving the mystery of the Black Mist. He doubted the content described in Gillian's letter. Sea monsters, do they really exist? The fleet Gillian mentioned in the diary was attacked by a sea monster, and all the crew members fought back and cut off the tentacles of the sea monster. Although the crew suffered heavy losses in the end, they still escaped the attack of the sea monster. Viserys now has some doubts in his heart. Was what Gillian saw at that time a real sea monster? Or was it just like what Viserys experienced in front of him, all of which were people's imaginations, and then they killed each other, and in fact there was no such thing as a sea monster? Then Eamon, what should we do now? Then the room fell into silence again, and after a long while, the red-haired girl asked again. She was at a loss now. Now that she was on the sea, everyone on the ship was in a frenzy of killing each other. If she continued to wait here, she would be found and killed by these people sooner or later. Jumping off the ship to survive now would be a suicide act, not to mention the dangerous Sea of Smoke, even on the sea outside. Maya asked Viserys for help, and Viserys was hesitating whether to summon Balerion now, or he would kill everyone here himself. At this time, there was a sudden sound of footsteps outside the room where the two were staying. It turned out that the fighting above had completely stopped at some point, and even the sound of talking could be heard. The captain seemed to be directing the sailors to rescue the disaster, as if nothing had happened. Who's in the room? A mercenary who walked to the door of Viserys and Maya seemed to hear some movement in the room, and suddenly asked nervously. But the two people in the room were even more nervous, including Viserys. The two looked at each other, and they couldn't figure out the details of the person outside the door. Living? Or dead? Or is it the state between madness and logic? But it is obvious that staying in the room and pretending to be dead will definitely not work. The person outside the door has been knocking on the door more and more fiercely, and it seems that he is calling his companions. Even if he kills him and escapes, now is the best opportunity. Otherwise, when the other party calls his companions, it will be even more troublesome. Viserys and Maya looked at each other and understood. Then the silver-haired young man stood up first, holding the hilt of the sword in one hand, and came to the door. Maya hid aside, ready to pierce the other's throat with a dagger at any time. Click. Then Viserys suddenly opened the door. Clang. Seeing the door suddenly opened, the person outside the door seemed to be more nervous than Viserys. He drew the long sword from his waist and stepped back a few steps, but when he saw the young man in front of him clearly, he breathed a sigh of relief and put the sword back into the scabbard. It's you. The person who came was Dick, who lived in the same dormitory with Viserys. He was also the first to start coughing. Now his body was covered with blood, and it looked like he had just experienced a fierce battle. Hey, Maya, you guys are hiding here? Dick also saw the girl hiding nearby, and then naturally greeted her. Running away is a very normal thing for mercenaries. He just didn't seize the opportunity to escape. Otherwise he would definitely not have fought bloody battles with the sea monster until now. However, if everyone on this ship just wanted to escape, then it would be a matter of time before the whole army was wiped out. Dick shrugged slightly. The sea monster has been repelled by us, and many brothers were killed and injured. You can come out now. The sea monster has been repelled? Viserys and Maya looked at each other again, and saw deep confusion in each other's eyes. What's going on? Maya lowered her voice, and asked in Viserys' ear. What's going on? Viserys also frowned slightly, looking up and down at Dick in front of him, feeling that he was deeply trapped in a fog, and couldn't find logic. Dick now looked normal, his words and actions were logical, he was not aggressive, and his eyes were not bloodshot. But if what he saw was true, then what happened just now? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318, The Current Situation of Pentus. Viserys and Maya followed the mercenary Dick back to the deck. The battle on the deck was over, and there were signs of destruction everywhere. Many people who had just hidden like Viserys came out one after another. The bodies left by the fierce battle on the deck were thrown into the sea. Viserys and his companions came out late and happened to see the last body thrown into the sea. Hey, wait a minute. The red-haired girl standing next to Viserys was about to speak to stop him, but she was a step too late. The body had been carried into the sea by two mercenaries. Plop, the body fell into the sea and splashed waves, and then disappeared without a trace. What happened? The two slaves who were working didn't know why Maya called them, and scratched their heads in surprise. Oh, it's okay. You are so quick. The girl with red ponytail sighed and complained. She just wanted to check the injuries of these bodies to see if they died from sword wounds or attacks by sea monsters. She even suspected that there was something wrong with her brain, or that even she and Demon had been tricked without knowing it. However, the last body had been thrown into the sea, and they had nowhere to find new evidence. Corpse? What do you want the body for? Nothing, we just want to see. Maya was talking to several mercenaries, asking about what had just happened. Viserys stood aside calmly, looking around, and his inner vigilance never relaxed. The grey fog has dissipated a lot. Viserys noticed this as soon as he walked out of the cabin, and his heart moved slightly. When the change just happened, the grey fog was very thick. Not to mention seeing the figures of the people on the opposite ship, even the ones on his own ship, that were a little far away could not be seen clearly. The visibility was extremely low, and the surroundings were full of fog. But now the grey fog seems to have dissipated a lot more than just now, and the visibility has improved significantly, returning to the state when they just entered the sea of smoke. The grey fog dissipated, and Viserys could even see the shadowy figures on another warship from the side of the ship. However, the people on the other side seemed to have just experienced a great battle. Traces of damage could be clearly seen on their hulls, and then bodies were thrown off the ship by the crew and mercenaries, falling into the sea and quickly disappearing. At this time, not far from the silver-haired young man, there was a bald man with tattoos all over his body. Tattoos are a unique culture of Volantis. Volantis liked to tattoo their achievements on their bodies. He led a few brothers, and was quietly looking at Viserys. The man with the title Iron Fist? Viserys also keenly noticed the other party's gaze, and then turned his head to look at the other party. He seemed to be someone who had just escaped from another hiding place. The two people looked at each other and stared slightly. Then Iron Fist Gus led his team to stride over. "Young boy, your name is Eamon, right?" The bald man took the initiative to extend his hand. Viserys did not care about the other party's name. His face was indeed a little younger, but his temperament seemed more mature and calm. The two shook hands briefly, and then Gus took the initiative to speak. "You all saw what happened just now, right?" Gus noticed Viserys and Maya coming out of the cabin, and knew that they were also the ones who had not been hit. In the current situation, where everything is unknown, whoever can unite is a better person, so he took the initiative to contact them. Although those who had been hit now looked very sober, and did not look crazy at all, no one could guarantee whether they would go crazy again. They could still recognize their own people now, but who knew if they could recognize them after a while. Therefore, Gus did not trust these people, and now he could only contact those who had not been hit to secretly connect the survivors. "I saw it." Viserys did not speak, and Maya nodded beside him, and then asked, "Did you find anything special?" "No." Gus shook his head slightly. He did not deliberately conceal any important information. But he was also a rough man, and the situation just now was urgent. He was busy escaping, and had no energy to observe these people. How did they regain consciousness? Viserys was silent for a while, and then asked. They just didn't see the outside scene clearly in the cabin, and since Gus had been outside, he should have seen something. How did they regain consciousness? The bald man frowned when he heard Viserys' question, and carefully recalled what happened not long ago, but he really couldn't think of any important plot. They just woke up suddenly, and the grey fog became much thinner at that time. Gus struggled to think about what happened at that time. "Oh, I seem to have really seen the shadow of the sea monster at that time." Then he suddenly spoke. He seemed to see a strange figure from the diffuse grey fog, but he didn't see it clearly. It has been half a month since Viserys left Pentos, and Pentos is still as usual. Viserys once designated Daenerys as his heir in private, but his sister was too young, so Viserys left Rhaenys to supervise the country when he went out again and again. Such a division of labor actually leaves hidden dangers. John Clinton once pointed out this problem. The disorder of the young and the old is the most likely to breed disasters. Rhaenys has been in charge of the country for many years, and her political experience and methods are far more mature than Daenerys, but she is not the heir. The two received the same education, and Viserys gave both girls the education of family heirs, so Viserys naturally knew this problem. However, this problem is based on the fact that he has no offspring. If Viserys has a son in the future, then all problems will be solved. However, facts have proved that Rhaenys did a good job. At least she did not make any mistakes. With the help of her uncle Oberyn, the entire dynasty's vast territory and 50,000 to 60,000 soldiers were safe and sound. Viserys handed the command scepter of the Unsullied to Rhaenys, and the regent princess had 2 dragons in her hands to command, and Oberyn brought 200 guards with him. As the Minister of Justice of the new dynasty, John Clinton directly controlled the 3,000 garrison of Pentos, and his deputy was Denzo Dehan, the former deputy commander of the Windblown. The Golden Group, which has 10,000 soldiers, now has no better place to go and can only be temporarily stationed in Pentus. They are also a huge force that cannot be ignored in this city-state. Therefore, the various forces in Pentus are now in a delicate balance. Although a Baron is in a high position, he cannot act recklessly, and it is not easy for the newly surrendered Golden Group to rebel. Not far from Pentus, the Andal 1st Legion, which is the most loyal to the Targaryen family, is eyeing it covetously. There are also 20,000 Dothraki people settled in the southeast of Pentus. Chapter 319, Conspiracy and Secret Talks. I understand your situation, and I also understand your anger, my lord. In the dim room, a man's voice sounded. His tone was elegant, which was obviously different from the accent of the bumpkins in the slums. He spoke the most standard Valyrian language. You have encountered naked betrayal, which is completely contrary to the deal you once made with him. After decades of twists and turns, you are back to square one. The dim light in the room cast two figures on the wall. The man who spoke in an elegant tone picked up a teapot and poured some tea into his and the other's cups. Although his words sounded like sarcasm, mocking the person sitting on the chair opposite him for wasting half his life and even struggling in the mire, and finally exchanged for a fate like before. Decades ago, he could get the same treatment as now by just nodding his head, but he didn't do it at that time. Is he really just afraid of death? No. Many people say that you ran away because you were afraid of death. But that's not the case. You are not afraid of death, you just want to get more. The man raised his teacup and toasted the person opposite him. He didn't like strong liquor, but preferred this kind of light drink because it could make him clear-headed. You are right. The person sitting opposite the man drank the tea in the cup happily, as if he were drinking wine, and then put it heavily on the table, his voice vicissitudes and a little resentful. But I'm not willing. He was unwilling to spend such a huge price and half of his life just to get such an ending. When he made this deal, he thought that the other party was just a young man who had not grown up. The other party dared to come to seize the city with 200 people. What kind of arrogance and courage is this? Perhaps only young people of this age who are fearless would dare to do such a thing. At that time, he even thought of robbing the thieves, but he didn't expect that the final result would smash his wishful thinking step by step. The other party forced him to attack the traditional forces of Pentus and forced him to break with Pentus. From then on, it would be even more difficult for him to gain a foothold here. Yes, you are unwilling. And now is your best chance. The man heard the resentment in the other party's tone and naturally understood that his words hit the other party's vital point and then continued to pursue the victory. The son of the Mad King has left Pentus, and you know this. Although his whereabouts are unknown, he took his black dragon with him, and the rest. The whispers in the house continued to sound. Outside the house, a man dressed as a servant was lying under the window, quietly eavesdropping on the conversation inside the house. His name is Hunter, and he is one of the slaves who was bought by the steward of the Tattered Prince 3 months ago. But that is only his superficial identity. His real identity is not a slave, but a hound secretly trained by Lord Ramsay Snow. The hound has a keen sense of smell and is most suitable for some monitoring and surveillance work. His task is to be assigned by Ramsay to monitor the Tattered Prince. But he didn't expect to monitor such important information today. The Tattered Prince secretly invited a person whose identity is still unknown to sneak into the prince's palace from the back door and then close the door to talk secretly. The content of the secret talk is even more terrifying. It turns out that the Tattered Prince has long been dissatisfied with Viserys. He thinks that he was deceived in the deal he made. Although he did get Pentus and became the Prince of Pentus, Viserys did not break his promise, but this is not what the Tattered Prince thought. He has no real power in his hands. In fact, he still has a little, but with the passage of time, the power in his hands has become smaller and smaller, and now he has really become a commander without troops. Even the former Windblown's men have rebelled one after another. Now even if the Tattered Prince wants to leave Pentus and regroup, he can't do it. Therefore, coupled with the lobbying of the mysterious man, the Tattered Prince seemed to want to seize the opportunity of His Majesty the King leaving Pentus to launch a coup. Isn't the Golden Group possible? They are just a group of mercenaries who value money over their lives. As long as they are paid, they are even willing to give up their own father. John Connington. Although John Connington's power is a bit pitiful now, and there is an Oberyn on his head, but in the final analysis, he still has 3,000 troops in his hands, and naturally entered the vision of the Tattered Prince. John Connington can't do it. This man is upright and stubborn. My lord, you want to launch a coup, and the biggest trouble is actually on the Unsullied. The existence of the Unsullied is simply a hurdle. They have protected the Nine Towers Palace, where the Regent Princess Rhaenys is staying. They have no chance to directly attack the Nine Towers Palace to end the war. The only chance now is to use other methods. Find a chance to kidnap the girl when she walks out of the palace and force her to hand over the Unsullied's command staff. The Unsullied only recognize the staff and not the person, and Oberyn can't just sit and watch his niece being killed, so he can only surrender obediently. At that time, while the discussion in the house was in full swing, there was a sudden movement outside the house. Click, the sound in the house stopped abruptly. Oh no. Outside the house, Hunter, who was monitoring, suddenly turned his head and looked up. The sound was not made by him. As an intelligence officer professionally trained by Lord Ramsay, how could he make such a low-level mistake? It turned out that a 3-color wildcat accidentally stepped on a movable brick when it ran by. The cat team didn't realize that they had made a big mistake at all, but just stared at the person squatting in the bushes below. Then it meowed and jumped off the wall and ran away. Run. Hunter felt his scalp tingling. Just as he was about to run away, he was caught by the Tattered Prince and the man who had a secret conversation with him. It's you. The Tattered Prince was shocked and angry when he saw Hunter. He was shocked that, if such a big thing was leaked out, he would be dead, and he was angry that the other party actually betrayed him. I will kill you. Then the Tattered Prince drew the long sword from his waist and stabbed Hunter to death with one sword, and the blood dyed the land red. He is dead, and the man named Ramsay will definitely come to investigate. The man who had a secret conversation with the Tattered Prince wore a pair of single-lens gold-rimmed glasses. This is a high-end product made by Mill, and its value can even hire a small mercenary group. It seems that this man's family is very wealthy, and his clothes are also extraordinary. At this moment, he frowned slightly and said, "It seems that this matter needs to be considered for a long time, my lord." Chapter 320, The Arrival of the White Walkers. In the distant Pentus, a long simmering dissatisfaction almost turned into a rebellion. However, because of the leak of information, the Tattered Prince could not figure out how much the enemy had already known about him, and he was also worried about alerting the enemy, so he was forced to delay indefinitely. After Hunter's death, the Tattered Prince fled Pentus on the pretext, but he did not escape too far away, but hid outside the city. He claimed to the outside world that he was tired of life in the palace recently and wanted to live in the manor outside the city for a while to relax. It was this careful decision that saved his life, otherwise John Connington would almost send troops to capture him. At that time, unless the Tattered Prince jumped into the sea, he could not escape the pursuit of the Targaryen soldiers, even if he went to heaven and earth. After his own spy died, Ramsay naturally investigated the prince's palace as expected. The butler of the prince's palace was actually someone he bribed. However, the Tattered Prince was experienced and had done a perfect job in the final stage. Ramsay did not find out anything from this investigation. He only knew that the Tattered Prince seemed to have invited a mysterious person to the palace for a secret talk. After all, before he had solid evidence, he could only investigate secretly because of the other party's special identity, and he could not directly come to the door to hold him accountable. Hunter's body was cremated within a short time after his death, and everything in his room was cleared out, leaving no clues. Ramsay could not even find the body, and could only attribute it to Hunter being exposed and eliminated by the Tattered Prince. But according to the most malicious speculation, Hunter must have discovered some secret of the Tattered Prince before his death. Otherwise the other party would not kill him to silence him. Then the Tattered Prince's panicked escape from Pentus further confirmed his point of view. Ramsay could almost intuitively confirm that there must be something wrong with the other party. He fled to the outside of Pentus because he was afraid that something would be exposed so that he could run away directly, but Ramsay could not find any evidence. He had no power to enforce the law and had no way to directly take action against the tattered prince, who was nominally a frontier official. Therefore, Ramsay found his old boss, John Connington, and wanted the Minister of Justice to dispatch the 3,000 city guards of Pentus to arrest the tattered prince. However, John was not an impulsive person. He was thoughtful and mature. He listened to Ramsay's speculation and thought it was possible, but he also knew that, although the tattered prince had no power, he was not easy to move, especially without evidence. John promised Ramsay that, if the tattered prince wanted to escape, he would immediately send troops to arrest him. And if the tattered prince just hid in the manor outside the city without any unusual movements, there would be no way to move him for the time being. There was a little turbulence in the sky above Pentus after Viserys left, but it did not cause too much trouble. And at the distant wall, Robert organized the coalition of the 7 kingdoms. Except for the Iron Islands, all the great nobles sent troops to rush over. More than 60,000 soldiers were gathered to resist the invasion of the White Walkers. Now the Wildling rebellion has been quelled, at least not as rampant as a few months ago. Robert even heard not long ago that a group of Wildlings attacked King's Landing like suicide, but unfortunately their actions were suppressed without even a splash. The Wildling rebellion is just a minor disease. Robert Baratheon, the Fat King of the 7 Kingdoms, sat on the throne of Winterfell. The owner of this place sat next to him as a foil, but Eddard Stark was upright and had no complaints. Winter is coming. In the final analysis, the biggest threat is the White Walkers, Your Majesty, Eddard Stark said in a heavy voice. What happened recently? The wall collapsed, the Wildlings poured into the 7 kingdoms, and the knights of the 7 kingdoms could patrol the outside of the wall more conveniently. Not long ago, a group of knights from the valley were suddenly besieged by the army of the dead when they went deep into the fist of the first men for inspection. The knights fought hard, but they did not expect that these enemies were actually immortal. Even if their heads were chopped off, they could still stand up, and their chopped hands struggled on the ground. They had to be almost crushed to pieces to be considered destroyed. The knights of the valley suffered heavy losses because they had no intelligence support. A large number of knights were knocked to the ground by the swarming dead and then eaten alive. Many knights who rushed out of the siege had tears in their eyes in the wind and snow, watching their companions being bitten to death alive, listening to their miserable howls. Even after returning to the camp, they could not forget it. This horrible scene left a deep psychological shadow on them. In short, they were scared out of their wits and developed mental illness. It took some time to soothe this unprecedented fear. This was the first time that the 7 Kingdoms coalition had really encountered an attack by the dead since the Night's Watch. This completely dispelled the doubts of those who still had doubts about this matter in the coalition. Because a knight had a chopped off dead hand hanging on his armor. At that time, the other party rushed up and grabbed the gap in his armor and was cut off by his sword, and the hand remained in the gap of his armor and was firmly stuck. However, when he returned to the camp, the dead hand was still struggling, and many soldiers of the coalition witnessed this scene. Even King Robert, Stannis, Eddard Stark and other nobles also rushed over to watch the moving dead hand. Swords cannot kill these dead people, but because of this dead hand, the observant Duke Stannis discovered that fire can completely burn the opponent. In fact, the Night's Watch Corps had suggested a long time ago that fire can restrain these dead people, and the dead bodies must be burned with fire, but it was not widely adopted because of the humble words. However, finding the weaknesses of the dead people can also boost the morale of the coalition soldiers who were frightened by the dead. It would be fine if these monsters could be killed. If it was true as the Knights of the Valley who escaped back said, these monsters could still move freely after being cut in half, then they really had no courage to resist. However, the good mood of the coalition soldiers was only temporary. Then another explosive news quickly spread in the coalition camp. That is, this time another patrol team in the west was suspected to have been attacked by the White Walkers, and almost all of them were wiped out. Only one person fled back in a hurry, but this person seemed to be scared silly and kept repeating a word. After the high-level kings, dukes and other people of the coalition arrived, the soldier who escaped back finally spoke something. Sure enough, they were attacked by the army of the dead, but this time the dead attacked an unusual monster. He stood out among the army of the dead and was different from those unconscious dead. He was tall, withered, pale as milk, his eyes were as cold as ice, and burning with flames, and he rode a skeleton horse. When the knights of the Western Territory looked at him, he also looked over. He looks like the commander of the army of the dead. Chapter 321, The World of Great Conflict. White Walkers. This is the real White Walker. In the hall of Winterfell, the grey-haired Maester Aemon spoke in a trembling voice. It is said that the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch once married a woman whose skin was as pale as the moon, whose eyes were like blue stars, and whose skin was as cold as ice. After bringing her back to the Nightfoot, the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch made her his queen. Maester Aemon flipped through the books left in the Night's Watch. Although the Black Castle collapsed, those precious books were also lost in that catastrophe. But Maester Aemon was like a living fossil, and many lost knowledge was still remembered in his mind. What he said came from a book called Watch on the Wall written by a doctor named Hammon in the Citadel. Maester Aemon is right. This story is also circulated in the north. The dark-haired Lord Eddard Stark sat on the side seat. Snowflakes were still floating outside the window of the hall, and the temperature emitted by the blazing fire in the fireplace kept everyone from being too cold. Eddard Stark had heard stories about the White Walkers from his nanny, since he was a child, but in this story, the names of the people were more accurate. The 13th commander of the Night's Watch was a Stark named Bran. He married a White Walker woman, and led the Night's Watch to independence. However, the final outcome was that he was defeated by his brother, the real King of the North, and then disappeared without a trace. The White Walkers are the leaders of these dead people. The dead people we encountered before may just be the vanguard of the White Walker army. Eddard Stark's words were heavy, and the atmosphere in the Winterfell Hall was a little depressing. The White Walkers have only appeared twice in the long history, but he didn't expect it to be his turn. Eddard Stark felt a lot of pressure. He must protect the people of the North, because it is the responsibility of the Stark family. The other commanders in the hall looked at each other and felt more difficult. Their family is still far away from the North, so they are not as anxious as the North Guardian, but they are also helpless in the face of such an enemy with unknown intelligence. Maester Aemon, you are well informed. It is known that fire will burn those dead people, but does fire have an effect on real White Walkers? Stannis, the Duke of Dragonstone, sat on a side seat, stroking his beard on his chin with his palm, and then asked abruptly. He was the calmest among the people present, because his fiefdom was on Dragonstone, just like this time when the king summoned the Iron Islands, but the other side didn't even pay attention. Although the Iron Islands have always had such a style and attitude, most people still think that the White Walkers and Wildlings have nothing to do with the Iron Islands, and the other side can't swim across the sea. They even hope that the Greenland will be in chaos. Fire has an effect on the corpse servants transformed by the White Walkers, but there is no literature to support whether it has an effect on the real White Walkers. Stannis asked Maester Aemon, and Maester Aemon did not hesitate to use his knowledge, and spoke in a trembling voice. After all, this is a war for all mankind. When he chose to give up revenge and stick to his promise, he had already transcended the shackles of family blood, and reached the height of the fate of all mankind. However, in the ancient documents, two possible weaknesses of the White Walkers are mentioned. One of them is obsidian, or dragon glass. According to the documents, dragon glass can kill White Walkers, and the other means is dragon steel. Valyrian steel weapons contain powerful magic. The dragon steel weapons of your lords may be able to kill the White Walkers. Maester Aemon sat in his seat and opened his milky white blind eyes and spoke. Obsidian. Dragon glass? What is this? Robert, who had been sitting in the middle seat without speaking for a long time, frowned and suddenly asked. He had never heard of such a thing. Obsidian. This material is forged from the fire of the gods deep in the earth. Thousands of years ago, the children of the forest used obsidian to hunt, because they did not know how to smelt metals. They wove clothes from leaves instead of armor, and used bark as leggings, so they looked as if they were integrated with the forest. Their arrows and blades were made of obsidian. At this time, Maester Luwin of Winterfell happened to walk into the hall. Hearing King Robert's question, he answered subconsciously. There are still a few obsidian daggers and arrowheads left in Winterfell. Then the fat Maester Luwin looked at his master, Lord Eddard Stark. My lord. A letter from King's Landing. Instantly, everyone in the hall focused their attention on Maester Luwin. Because ravens only take fixed routes to find fixed targets, all communications with the south now rely on the ravens of Winterfell. This letter could be written to anyone present. Viserys' quiet disappearance was only circulated among the high-ranking officials of Pentos. People didn't know that the king, who was so irresponsible for his own safety, had gone out on a dragon to travel. Winterfell gathered a coalition of nobles from all over the Seven Kingdoms, ready to meet their biggest challenge. What they encountered before was just the vanguard of the army of the dead, and the truly terrifying White Walkers had just begun to appear. Now a world of great strife seems to be born, and all parts of the world are in turmoil. Even in the distant Yeti, according to merchants, the emperor has raised 300,000 troops to conquer foreign countries. The Great Grass Sea, which has just experienced turmoil between Yeti and the free trade cities, is also the same. Before Viserys left Pentos, there were two rumors circulating here, one of which was a riot in the Sea of Smoke and Grey Fog, and the other was about the unrest in V's Dothrak. The three Khals that once joined forces to conquer Pentos violated the sacred rule of not killing each other in the holy city and started fighting, killing blood for a while. The final result was that none of the three Khals won and suffered the punishment of the horse god. Instead, they were defeated by a mysterious Khal who came from nowhere and finally won the fruits of victory. This Khal called himself Mengo Khal, who had the same name as the first Khal to unify the Dothraki, named Death. Now he was sitting in a shadowy place with a golden sword. His cheeks could not be seen clearly, only a pair of scalded eyes. He didn't say a word the whole time, and even his breathing could not be heard. Behind him stood three people wrapped in black robes and wearing wooden lacquer masks on their faces, 2 men and 1 woman. There were 2 pale tear marks on the scalded wooden lacquer mask, which looked a little chilling. Everyone knew that the Khal didn't like the light. Everyone also knew that the Khal didn't like to talk. Chapter 322, Mengo Khal. Khal Mengo hid in the shadows and said nothing, but he issued an order to conquer other tribes, which was conveyed by the black-robed Shadowbinder standing behind him. Khal Mengo is the most powerful warrior on the Great Grass Sea. He is the horse that rides the world. There can only be one true Khal in the entire Dothraki Sea. The petite woman was wrapped in an inky black robe, with a bright red and pale mask on her face. Her voice was cold and calm. All Dothraki should submit to him. Go. Declare war on all Khals, and we will defeat them one by one. Khal. Listening to the cold words above their heads, the 2 Khals kneeling below were shocked, and their bodies were even trembling slightly. It was unknown whether they were shocked by the woman's words, or for other reasons. They had seen with their own eyes that this woman named Killis had strangled a Khas leader who stood up and accused Khal Mengo of not trusting the witch with her shadow. The strong warrior was once a general of Joko Khal. He was brave and good at fighting, with scars all over his body. He once personally cut off the head of a warrior who won the championship in the Meereen Arena. However, the strong Dothraki warrior had no ability to resist the Shadowbinder wrapped in black robes. Before he could raise his scimitar, he was tightly entangled by the shadow of the opponent. Then he easily broke his neck, and the head fell from his neck without even bleeding. The witchcraft of the lizard terrified all the Dothraki who witnessed this scene. The reason why they hated the witch was actually the fear of magic. The 3 Shadowbinders grasped this point keenly. They claimed that the soul of the Dothraki warrior who died in the hands of the Shadowbinder had been stolen, and he was not qualified to be cremated, and his soul could not reach the heaven. From then on, there was no more opposition in the entire KLS, because the most feared thing for all Dothraki was that they would not be able to fly to the heaven after death, and become part of the stars. Understood. The 2 former Khals knelt on the ground and submitted to the new Khal, saying that they would obey his orders and start preparing to conquer other tribes from today. Then Khal Bono and Khal Jacko stood up and turned to leave Khal Mengo's tent. However, before leaving, Khal Jacko lifted the curtain, but couldn't help turning his head to look at the huge figure sitting on the throne. He shuddered slightly, then hurried out and lowered the curtain. Bono and Jacko were lucky, still keeping the title of Khal and leading their own tribes, but they all had to submit to Khal Mengo. The 3 Shadowbinders claimed that Khal Mengo would be the common king of all Dothraki people, and the same would be true for other Khals who would submit in the future. But the only difference was that all Khals who submitted to Khal Mengo, the common king, had to hand over their shadows. Crash. Jacko and Bono walked out of Cal Mengo's tent, and the two looked at each other. Although they didn't speak, they both saw the meaning in each other's eyes. Annoyance and remorse. If they hadn't killed each other, perhaps they wouldn't have let the other party take advantage of the situation. As for KO Bono and KO Jacko both shuddered at the same time. There was only one person who could be called KO by Bono and Jacko at the same time. But he should be dead. How could he not be dead? They had seen each other in the sea of fire with their own eyes, but when he walked out, they were still scared. KO was like a ghost resurrected from the dead. His eyes were numb and flashed with scarlet light. His body swelled to be taller than before, like a giant. Under the grey-black skin, the purple blood vessels also stretched, flowing with cold dark blood. He used to be RKO, but he should be dead. The two looked at each other, knowing it well. How could such a person be called a living person? And so much time has passed, they have never heard the Cal say a word. He hides in the dark all day long without saying a word. All orders are conveyed by the shadow binder. Even if he is still alive, I'm afraid he is a controlled walking corpse. The shadow binder controlled the Cal's body, making him their lackey and tool to control the Dothraki warriors. The greatest horseman on the great grass sea should not be reduced to such a fate. Bono Cal said hatefully. Although he betrayed Drogo in that war, he admired him very much and thought that he should not suffer such an insult after his death. What Mengo Cal? This is obviously Drogo's body. What can we do? And Jacko Cal's face was also a little distorted. He gritted his teeth tightly and then lowered his voice and spoke. Dothraki is now actually controlled by Mengo Cal's tribe. The other party ignored the various sacred regulations of the holy city and declared that he would become the only king among the Dothraki. He occupied the Holy Mother Mountain and the womb lake of the world, ready to welcome the submission of all Cals. The other Dothraki who didn't know why all violated the rules of the holy city in that turmoil. They were afraid and panicked, so they were more eager than others to tear up the sacred rules. The 40,000 Dothraki roaring warriors were blinded. What should we do? Now the bright sunlight shone down from above, and the two angry Cals felt cold in their hearts after saying this. Anger is anger. They wanted to skin and pull out the muscles of the three shadow binders from the far east and gritted their teeth fiercely, but in the end, they seemed to be deflated balls and lost their fighting spirit all of a sudden. What can they do? They didn't have any way. Forget it. Then the two of them were silent, without even saying hello to each other, and then they went their separate ways, busy preparing to attack other tribes. And in his receding back, the petite female shadow binder walked out of the tent. She wore a scarlet and pale mask, and her eyes looked at the two people's backs quietly, as if she knew what they were talking about. She spoke calmly. Let's go. The huge figure sitting on the throne stood up slowly after hearing her order. The other two shadow binders also walked over in silence with their scepters in hand. Not far away. Cal. The surroundings were full of busy Dothraki people. Their shadows were cast on the ground. Seeing the Cal passing by, they quickly put down their work and greeted the two Cals. The two Cals also nodded in response. But no one noticed that their shadows were not cast on the ground. It seemed that they were eaten by the devil. Chapter 323 Arrival in Valyria. There are too many secrets hidden in this world. What we see is just the tip of the iceberg. And there is an abyss buried below. Viserys said while standing at the bow. He was wearing simple clothes, with a long sword at his waist, and his long silver hair tied into a braid. He looked clean and tidy and sunny, which attracted Maya's attention. Even if Viserys did some simple disguise, he still made it ugly, but he was still outstanding in appearance, and the girls couldn't help but peek at him. Viserys spoke. Not far away, the sailors and mercenaries on the ship could already see the edge of the Valyria continent. This peninsula, which was once closely connected to the Essos continent, was shattered by the catastrophe and split into many pieces of different sizes. The smallest continent is just a small island of dozens of meters long and wide, and there are even smaller ones like reefs in the sea. The complex sea conditions in the Sea of Smoke are mostly caused by the broken continent, with dense reefs, and they will hit the reef and sink if they are not careful. And this time they are going to explore the main plate of the broken continent of Valyria. This place contains the core secrets of Valyria and huge wealth. Since Valyria began to rise 5,000 years ago and then enslaved the entire world, the accumulated wealth is almost immeasurable. Therefore, it attracts countless fearless people every year to explore the ruins and look for lost treasures. Why do you say that? Viserys sighed, and the girl standing next to him asked in confusion. She didn't understand what Viserys meant. What secret? What iceberg? However, Viserys didn't explain too much, but the troubles he encountered along the way made him sigh from the bottom of his heart. If it were in the outside world, no matter what, you would never think that there are so many horrors and secrets hidden in the Sea of Smoke. Nothing. This is just what a friend of mine once told me. Viserys shook his head and said, she warned me that the dragon has been resurrected and all the magic in the world is returning. Be careful of those who have special powers. They may despise the secular monarchy and wantonly destroy the normal rules if they suddenly regain their power. Just like a person who has been hungry for too long and can suddenly open his belly to feast, he will not be able to stop eating too much, which is not good for his body. These were the words that Melisandre warned Viserys. She warned Viserys to be careful of those people before leaving Pentos and going to the wall. Which witches, shadowbinders, wizards, skin changers, etc. They all have terrifying power, and their power has returned. Really? Are they so powerful? The red-haired girl was slightly stunned when she heard Viserys' words. She never thought that ordinary people could master such powerful power and even threaten the secular monarchy. Although Maya did not live in Westeros, she was still in a relatively free trading city-state, but she also understood the importance of bloodline. In Volantis, the ancient families that can be traced back to the Valyrian period have no chance to rise. Even free people can only become second-class citizens, and slaves are even worse. Slaves are slaves themselves, and the children of slaves are also slaves. Generation after generation, they will never be able to turn over. However, Maya shuddered when she thought of the series of terrible things she encountered after entering the Sea of Smoke, and seemed to believe it a little. This mysterious power is too terrible. Since the first riot caused by the Grey Fog, all the survivors have become much more cautious. The Grey Fog does not have a negative impact all the time, and the survivors are not clear about the specific reasons. Perhaps only by figuring out the secret of the Sea of Smoke can it be solved. Anyway, now when the Grey Fog suddenly gathers, you have to find a place to hide quickly and avoid being hunted down by those who have become slaves of the Grey Fog to survive. And when the Grey Fog dissipates, it will not be infected. Viserys, Maya, the man codenamed Iron Fist and a group of survivors on the ship helped each other and formed a secret alliance. However, even so, the 20 ships sailed in the Grey Fog for 3 full days. According to the navigation map, they should have walked out of the Sea of Smoke, but on the evening of the 3rd day, everyone barely saw the trace of land. During these 3 days, there were several riots on the ship, and the survivors suffered heavy casualties. The sailors and mercenaries enslaved by the Grey Fog pulled them out one by one and killed them. Viserys also spent a lot of effort during these Grey Fog riots. A large number of infected sailors and mercenaries wanted to hunt them down. Maya was even infected once, and her eyes turned blood red, but fortunately she was discovered by Viserys in time and slapped twice to wake her up. After waking up, Maya covered her face and said that she was slapped twice by the sea monster and asked Viserys what happened to her just now. But Viserys didn't say much, just said that she was dreaming, and he found that his body seemed to be more resistant to Grey Fog than others. Viserys ran to avoid being chased when the Grey Fog was pervasive and inhaled a lot of Grey Fog. However, apart from coughing, Viserys did not feel any discomfort. And Viserys also confirmed what Gus said at that time. He seemed to have seen the figure of the sea monster. Viserys and Maya were separated when they were avoiding pursuit. He killed 2 pursuers, one of whom was strangled by the neck and thrown into the sea. At this time, Viserys seemed to see a huge shadow swimming under the ship in the deep and boiling sea. The other party had countless soft long legs. Each tentacle was more than 10 meters long. It swept away the body of the mercenary and dragged it under the sea. There was no attack on the ship. Viserys was stunned when he saw this scene at that time and even thought he was dazzled. Because the surrounding fog was too dense and the sea water was boiling, he did not see clearly, and then the huge figure disappeared. While Viserys and Maya were chatting on the boat, the captain standing at the highest point finally spoke with a trumpet. "We have arrived at the ruins of Valyria. Everyone get ready to disembark." The flagship not far away also sent out flag signals. Now that we are close to the mainland, the grey fog has become much thinner, and flag signals can be seen. Moreover, after arriving at this ancient and mysterious continent, the flagship seems to have become much more low-key, fearing that the melodious horn sound will attract some unknown existence. "Drop anchor." Boom, the captain ordered, and the ship was finally fixed successfully with the efforts of the sailors. Viserys, Maya and a group of mercenaries jumped off the ship and set foot on this land for the first time. "This is Valyria." The silver-haired young man stepped on the soft and muddy land under his feet. It looked no different from ordinary land. There were broken stones and some traces left by former explorers on the ground. Then Viserys raised his head and looked around the silent surroundings, the setting sun and the shadows of trees. But he suddenly felt a palpitation in his heart. Chapter 324, Building a Camp. Everyone, prepare to set up camp. When all the ships were docked and fixed on the shore, a large number of mercenary sailors and slaves who participated in this operation stood on the muddy and wet land. Then the commander of the expedition on the flagship, the steward of the leader of the Volantis Tiger Party, walked down from the ship. His name was Wilder Megia. He was the nephew of the governor of Malachia. Wilder was highly regarded and trusted by his uncle. He led the Tiger Cloak army of Volantis and made many outstanding achievements. That was why he got such an important position. Wilder is now in his 40s. He is wearing a full military uniform, bright armor and a sword hanging from his waist. Standing on the bow, his dark eyes swept over everyone on the beach, looking very majestic. He waited until everyone got off the ship and confirmed that the beach was safe before walking down from the warship. Then he looked up at the sky and gave the order to set up camp on the spot. "Let's rest here for one night." After a lot of trouble, it is now evening. Dusk and sunset. The red glow penetrated the thin mist and sprinkled on the land. "Here, hurry up. 2 more pieces of wood." Everyone began to build their tents and prepare to cook. At the same time, they cut down some trees in the surrounding woods to make a simple wall to surround the camp for protection. The expedition team did not plan to explore the Valyrian ruins at night when they first came to the ruins. In such an era, marching at night has always been a taboo, not to mention the dangerous task of exploring the ruins of Valyria. Therefore, it is understandable that Wilder was extremely cautious. After all, he is also an experienced commander. Viserys was also mixed in the crowd. He was holding an axe in his hand and was assigned a job. He followed everyone to the grove not far from the beach to cut down a few trees. Maya, Gus the Iron Fist, and his brothers followed Viserys, and the survivors on their ship were still huddled together for warmth. Bang, he swung the axe and chopped the tree trunk, and sawdust flew. It was his first time to set foot on this land, and Viserys was also very careful. He had a palpitation since he stepped on this land, as if some danger was about to come, so he quietly raised his vigilance. The first impression that this mysterious continent gave Viserys was depression. There were fish in the water, trees on the ground, and everything looked normal, but it gave people a feeling of depression. If you sum it up, it would be inconsistent. "Be careful," Viserys said concisely, and whispered while chopping trees. "Yes, I understand." The people around nodded. Then time passed quickly, and the sky gradually darkened. The sunset completely sank below the horizon, and the whole world fell into darkness, and groups of bonfires were lit. Although lighting a bonfire in such an unknown place is a very dangerous thing, it may attract something. But darkness is more likely to breed fear, and humans cannot lose light, just like fish cannot lose water. The simple camp that was built in a hurry before has been completed. Although the conditions are a bit shabby, you can't expect much in such a dangerous environment. No matter what happens, you must report it immediately. Wilder arranged some people to be on duty, and the middle-aged man in full military uniform said seriously, "Excluding those who need to be on duty today, all the rest are ready to rest." Viserys and Maya are lucky. They are not so unlucky to be assigned to be on duty on the first day. Tonight is just the right time to have a good rest. The two of them were assigned to the same tent. After so many days of getting along and experiencing hardships together, The relationship between the two is gradually warming up. They are good friends. However, everyone else thinks that there must be something between Eamon and Maya. At first, they think Eamon is a young white face, but later they find out that Maya is a woman who has a thigh. The performance of the silver-haired young man fell into the eyes of everyone, and he is definitely a good player. But in fact, only the two of them know that nothing has happened between them. They are just friends who share hardships. And in such an environment, there is no interest in anything happening. The night outside was deep. Darkness enveloped the continent. There were no insects chirping, no birds singing, no sound at all, and the silence made people feel a little blocked. I always have a bad feeling that tonight may not be so peaceful. In the tent, Viserys took off the heavy leather armor outside. It was almost impossible to fall asleep wearing such hard and boiled leather armor. But he still wore his coat, not only because he was sharing a tent with a girl. And now that he had set foot on the Valyrian continent, danger could come at any time, and he didn't want to escape naked. Viserys put the Valyrian steel dagger he carried with him under the headrest. Valyrian steel can kill White Walkers, and maybe it can also work for some monsters in the ruins. The red-haired girl sitting on another sleeping bag also took off her leather armor, revealing the white lining inside, wrapped tightly. Although there are differences between men and women, but the two did not show any embarrassed expressions. After all, they were all for survival. The girl sat on her sleeping bag with her legs crossed, bare white feet, and didn't seem to be in a hurry to fall asleep. I feel the same way. Maya opened the gap in the tent and looked out. The dark sky was covered with a layer of mist. The fog outside seems to have become thicker. The fog on the land is thinner than that on the Sea of Smoke, but the color seems to be a little deeper, and it is a little thicker at night than during the day. The grey fog on the Sea of Smoke seems unable to invade the land. Just like the last period of time approaching the mainland, the sea monsters seem to no longer attack ships. Viserys had seen it in Gillian's diary. The sea monsters seem to be afraid of this land, and don't want to get close, but they can't stay away, and flee to other seas outside the Sea of Smoke. If these sea monsters escape from the Sea of Smoke, I'm afraid that the world shipping industry will suffer a huge blow and return to the period of land closure. Chapter 325 Monster Attack. Weren't you always curious about why I insisted on exploring the ruins of Valyria, Eamon? The red-haired girl looked at the sky outside the tent and then suddenly spoke. I can tell you that my parents died on this land, so I have to come here to take a look anyway. Whether it's to find their bones or to avenge them, or even just to take a look. Viserys, who was already lying down, heard the girl's words and raised his head slightly to look at Maya. What about you? What are you here for, Eamon? Maya pronounced the last Eamon very hard. It seems that she had known for a long time that Eamon was just an alias. Viserys did not tell her the truth. Although Viserys was slightly stunned, he was not surprised that Maya had already known that he had disguised his identity. The two of them had been very close during this period, and he must have revealed some flaws. I'm curious. I want to unravel this dusty history. Viserys shook his head and said. He did not lie to Maya. He did come here to decipher the secret. Is that so? Maya obviously did not expect that Viserys' reason was to decipher the secret. She blinked slightly, but this time she chose to believe Eamon's apostrophe answer. Most of the tents in the camp had turned off the lights. Except for the mercenaries on duty holding torches, there was only a faint moonlight outside, and the rest was shrouded in darkness. Viserys and Maya chatted briefly in the tent for a while, and then they lay down to rest. Under the misty moonlight, time passed quietly. Except for the breathing sounds coming from the tents, there was the sound of waves hitting the boats. The whole world was silent. However, perhaps it was because it was destined to be restless when coming to this mysterious continent. I don't know how much time had passed, and a short and rapid scream broke the silence. Who is it? Then there was a shouting voice. It seemed that someone was attacked and was discovered by other mercenaries on duty, and then the sound of bows and arrows rang out, one ring after another. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of the bowstring seemed to hit something. The mercenaries chased after it. Fortunately, this massive action also brought about 100 war horses. The monster that attacked the mercenaries felt a little pain after being shot by the arrow, or thought that it could not escape by dragging its prey, so it let it go. It crawled on all fours at a very fast speed, and its figure soon sank into the darkness and disappeared without a trace. Don't run. The brave mercenaries rode their horses to chase after it, wanting to kill the other party, but they didn't catch anything and returned angrily after a while. Maya slept very lightly with her dagger under her head, and she naturally woke up in this brief episode. What happened? However, when the red-haired girl opened her eyes, the first picture she saw was an empty sleeping bag. Iman's figure had disappeared without a trace. Huh? Where did Iman go? Maya's eyes froze slightly in the darkness. She slept lightly and was alert, but when did Iman go out in the middle of the night? She didn't feel anything at all. It seemed that Iman was even more mysterious than she thought. Then Maya reached out and touched Iman's sleeping bag and found that it was already cold. It seemed that he had not just left, but had been gone for a long time. What did Iman do? Maya was a little confused. He had been gone for a long time, and it was definitely not because of what happened just now that he left first, but he had left a long time ago. And outside was in chaos at this time. Everyone was a mercenary, dancing on the edge of a knife on weekdays, so everyone was vigilant and woke up at the slightest disturbance. The commander of this expedition, Wildameja, naturally woke up and sat by the bed. There was still some anger on his face, and no one would be happy if they were woken up while sleeping well. What happened? But Wilda didn't need to check it himself, and soon some information was sent over. It turned out that a mercenary on duty was attacked by an unknown creature. Some witnesses claimed it was a wolf, while others said it was much larger than a wolf, with black and white hair, sharp teeth, and could walk upright. However, the people who went to chase it came back and reported that the creature ran on 4 legs, and its figure was indeed a little larger than a wolf, a bit like a beast like a shadow mountain cat. It turns out that someone was attacked by a monster. Inside Wilda's tent, Viserys was dressed in black, his eyes flickering slightly. At this moment, he was hiding in the shadows, listening silently to the guards coming to report to their commander under everyone's eyes. I remember that Gillian's diary also described a monster that lived in the ruins of Valyria. But the monster Gillian encountered seemed to be a guy with fish fins, not a monster similar to a werewolf. Viserys hid in the shadows and couldn't help but feel a little moved, thinking about this matter. Are these things the result of the transformation of the survivors who stayed on the Valyria continent after the wrath of the gods? Since there are sea monsters in the Smoky Sea, it is not surprising that there are other monsters on this land. Even in the depths of the Valyria ruins, there are monsters that can injure the Black Death. These are likely to be the descendants of the survivors of that year. They may be humans or animals. Just like the stone people in the Sad territory, no one knows what kind of ghost it has become now. Viserys' guess is very bold, and why he did not sleep in the tent in the middle of the night, but appeared here, was to secretly read some information about this operation. Viserys' identity is special. He is not a real adventurer. Although he followed these people in, it does not mean that he will continue to follow them. There is a mysterious connection between Viserys and Balerion. The silver-haired young man successfully landed on the Valyria continent and provided Balerion with a coordinate. Next, it is enough to wait for Balerion to fly over. This road should be considered a safe passage in a strict sense. At least they got in alive. It was even less costly than Gillian's expedition. Only 2 of the 20 ships were lost in the Sea of Smoke. Volantis is so close to the Sea of Smoke and is so powerful that it has naturally explored a relatively safer road over the years. That's why Viserys sneaked in with the help of Volantis power. But now the outside world is in chaos, and if it drags on, there is a possibility that he will be discovered. It's time for Viserys to leave. Then the silver-haired young man hiding in the dark of the tent turned into a ball of black mist and disappeared without a trace. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.